Hello, everybody. You're listening to Sleepwalker Radio. If our stories help you sleep or relax, please like, comment, and subscribe. Now close your eyes, and let's begin. I've never really believed in ghosts or spirits or anything like that. I've always thought that people saw things because their mind wanted them to see it, or they were tired or stressed or wanted attention. But whenever I think back to this story my mom told me, I get this tight feeling in my chest, like a ball of cold air pressing down. It's not because I think it's supernatural, but because even thinking about what she saw and how she felt makes me feel sick in my stomach. I can picture her as a little girl, just 9 or 10 years old, trying to sleep alone in that room every night. My mom grew up in the Midlands, in a busy little town that wasn't poor, but wasn't really rich either. Her family had been renting a 2-bedroom terrace for years, but when my granddad got a better job at the mill, they finally decided to move somewhere bigger. They found this Victorian 3-story house on a quiet street, just outside the town center. It wasn't fancy inside, but it had space. Big windows, high ceilings, and the top floor all to itself, like a small attic, but wide with a proper staircase going up. My mom was the oldest of 3 kids, so they gave her that room. She was excited about it at first. She would tell me how the first few nights, she just sat by the small square window up there, looking at the streetlights and rooftops. She used to read comics up there at night, feeling like she was far away from the noise of her brothers fighting downstairs. But she told me that after about a week or 2, she started to feel wrong up there. She never described it like fear at first. She said it felt like someone was watching her sleep. You know that feeling you get when you're trying to sleep in an unfamiliar place, and your brain keeps telling you to open your eyes, to check the corners of the room, to make sure no one is there? She said it was like that, except she knew someone was there. Not just a feeling, she knew. But every time she turned the lamp on or sat up in bed, she saw nothing, so she would eventually lie back down and tell herself she was being silly. It went on for days. She got quieter at school. Teachers wrote to my grandma, saying she seemed tired all the time. She was eating less at dinner. She was 9 or 10, and when you're that age, the world still feels huge and unstoppable. I think about how she must have felt lying there at night, with no way to explain why her stomach felt sick or why she couldn't close her eyes properly. She told my grandma after a few days that she was seeing a man in her room. She said it casually the first time, just that there was a man standing at the end of her bed when she woke up in the middle of the night. My grandma thought she was dreaming and brushed it off. Kids say stuff like that all the time, about monsters under the bed or shadows in the wardrobe. But Mum didn't drop it. She started telling her again and again. She stopped sleeping properly. Some nights she would wake up screaming, and my granddad would go stomping up the narrow staircase to tell her off for waking her brothers. My mum told me exactly what she saw. She said it wasn't like he appeared in front of her all at once. She would wake up in the dark, the room lit faintly orange from the streetlight outside, and she would see the top of someone's head at the side of her bed. It would rise up, slowly, like he was standing up from under the floor. She could see his hair first. She said it was thin and flat, lying against his head like he had been sweating. Then she would see his forehead, his eyes closed, and then his nose and mouth. But what she noticed most was the rope. The thick old rope tied around his neck, pulled so tight that the skin folded under it. She said it was like the man was still dead, even as he stood there. His arms hung down by his side. His skin looked gray and drained, like waterlogged wood. His head always stayed tilted slightly down, like it was too heavy for him to lift. Every time she saw him, she froze. She didn't scream at first. She would just watch him, too scared to move, too scared to blink, because she was terrified he would look up at her. But then, eventually, she would start crying. Then she would scream for Grandma. By the time Grandma ran up there, the man was gone. Mum would be sweating, shaking, saying over and over again that she didn't want to sleep up there. But Grandma didn't believe her. She thought she was just trying to get out of having her own room, scared to sleep alone. She told her to grow up and stop making up stories. It went on like that for weeks. My mum started refusing to go to bed at all. She would sit at the kitchen table until she fell asleep, or she would lie on the carpet downstairs and pretend to be asleep so no one would carry her up to her room. My grandma started getting angry with her. My granddad would shout at her to stop acting like a baby, but she couldn't. Every night she was forced back up those stairs. Every night she lay in her bed, listening to the house creak and settle, waiting for the scrape of something under the floorboards, waiting to see the top of his head rising from the darkness beside her bed. Then, one day, Grandma was talking to a neighbor. It was an old woman who lived 2 houses down, someone who had lived on that street her whole life. Grandma told her about my mom acting up, half complaining, half asking for advice. The old woman asked her what room my mom slept in. When Grandma said she had the top floor to herself, the woman went quiet. She asked if she could talk to my mom directly. Grandma didn't really want to, but she let her. So this old woman sat my mom down at her kitchen table and asked her what she saw at night. My mom told her everything. She described the man exactly as she saw him. His thin hair, his shut eyes, the heavy tilt of his head, the noose wrapped tight around his neck. The woman just nodded as my mom spoke. Then she told Grandma something that made her face go pale. Years ago, before they bought the house, a man had lived up there in that top room. He rented it from the old owners after his wife left him. He worked at the docks but drank most nights. One day, they found him hanging from the thick beam that ran across the ceiling. He had stood on a chair, tied the rope to the beam, and stepped off. He'd been dead for 2 days before anyone found him. The way my mom described him matched exactly how he was found. The same clothes, the same hair, the same rope tied the same way. I remember my mom telling me that after Grandma heard that, she didn't say a word. That same week, she moved my mom into her brother's room and slept on the sofa herself. They started looking for a new place immediately. Within a month, they moved just down the street to another terrace. It was cramped, but my mom said she never saw him again. Except once. A few days after they moved out, she woke up in her new room and saw him standing outside the window, looking in. She said he didn't look angry. He didn't look sad. He just stood there with his head hanging to one side, his shut eyes facing the glass. Then she blinked, and he was gone. She never saw him again after that. But what makes my chest tighten, what makes my throat dry, is what happened after. The house didn't stay empty long. A young couple moved in after them. My grandma saw them moving in one morning while she walked to the corner shop. She watched them carry boxes and furniture up the steps. They looked happy, like all young couples, thinking their life was about to begin there. But then, a few days later, my grandma was woken up by noise in the street. She looked outside and saw the same couple carrying all their stuff out to their car in the middle of the night. She watched them load up boxes, kitchenware, everything, barely speaking to each other. Before dawn, they were gone. They never came back. No one ever told her why they left, but she always wondered. My mom always wondered too. I think about that house sometimes. I think about the fact that it still stands there, probably rented to other families over the years. I wonder if kids since then have woken up in the middle of the night, staring at the top of a man's head rising from the floor, seeing his neck crushed by the rope, seeing his heavy head hanging forward with his eyes closed like he was asleep forever. I wonder how many of them kept quiet. How many of them were told it was just a dream, just shadows, just childish imagination. How many of them still remember it to this day, sitting alone in the dark, knowing that what they saw wasn't just a story. I still don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe in spirits trapped in rooms or people doomed to haunt the places they died. But every time I think about what my mom saw, every time I picture her as a little girl lying frozen in that bed, it makes me feel something close to fear. Because whether it was real or not doesn't matter. What matters is that she saw it, and she lived with it every single night, unable to move, unable to scream until it was too late. That's what makes me feel sick. That something made her feel so powerless, so alone, so broken, that even now, as an adult, she can't tell the story without her hands shaking and her voice dropping to a whisper. And that's the part one think about when I can't sleep at night. Not ghosts, not curses, but the idea that sometimes your mind shows you something so clear, so real, that even when you close your eyes or leave the room or leave the entire house, it stays with you forever, waiting in the dark corners of your memory. Always there, whether you believe in it or not. When I was probably 6 or 7 years old, Halloween was one of those nights I looked forward to for weeks. The entire town would light up with orange string lights, carved pumpkins glowing on every porch, fake cobwebs hanging from railings, and kids in costumes running across yards, ignoring sidewalks just to get to the next house faster. I remember that year I was dressed as a pirate. I had a cheap plastic hook in one hand, and a sword that bent too easily in the other. My mom had drawn a little beard on my chin with black eyeliner, and I wore this red sash tied tightly around my waist. I felt proud of it, even though the hat kept falling over my eyes every time I tilted my head. My older sister was a witch that year. She had a long black dress with jagged ends, a tall pointy hat, and her hair sprayed green. My mom and dad were walking behind us with coffee cups in their hands, steam rising into the cold night air. The street we were on was the most popular street for trick or treating. It was lined with big two-story houses with wide porches, each decorated more than the last. Some houses had skeletons sitting in rocking chairs, some had people dressed as zombies sitting perfectly still until you got close, and some just had their lights off completely, as if hiding from the whole event. We went house by house, the air smelling like wet leaves and cold cement. Every step I took, I could hear the crunch of fallen leaves under my thin plastic boots. I remember how my pillowcase was getting heavier with every house, filled with little mini chocolate bars, lollipops, tiny packs of gummy bears, and small bags of chips. My sister was already talking about trading candy as soon as we got home, planning how she'd take my Kit Kats and give me her plain lollipops instead. I remember feeling excited but tired. My hands were getting cold even through my thin gloves, and my nose felt numb from the cold air. We were walking up to this house that I had always liked because of how it looked. It was dark blue with white trim, and it had these giant bushes shaped like spirals on either side of the porch stairs. They had orange lights wrapped around them, making them glow in the dark. The house had a big front porch with 4 or 5 wide wooden steps leading up to it. There was a rocking chair to the left side, near the wall, and a small table next to it with a big bowl of candy on top. My mom saw something I didn't. She saw the guy who lived there, probably the dad or uncle or older brother, get ready. He was wearing a full black sheet, draped completely over him, so he looked like a shadow sitting there in the chair. He pulled the sheet down over his shoulders and head so that no part of his clothes or skin was showing, just this blob of black fabric. He was sitting perfectly still as we walked up the stairs, and I didn't notice him at all. My mind was only focused on the candy bowl sitting there on the little round metal table. My mom was standing at the bottom of the stairs telling me to grab some candy. She sounded casual, like nothing was wrong. My sister went first. I watched her walk up the stairs confidently. Her dress brushed the ground, and I remember hearing the little jingle of the metal bangles she was wearing on her wrist. She walked right up to the bowl, grabbed a handful of candy, stuffed it in her bag, and turned to run off the porch down the stairs without looking back. It seemed so easy, like there was nothing to worry about. Then it was my turn. I took a step forward onto the porch and felt the wood creak under my boots. I could smell something weird, like wet wood mixed with pumpkin guts. My pillowcase was heavy, so I kept switching it from my left hand to my right hand as I walked towards the table. I looked down at the bowl. It was overflowing with candy, little Snickers, Reese's Cups, Milky Ways, and mini bags of M-backslash, and I could feel my heart beat faster just seeing all that candy sitting there waiting for me. I reached my hand forward, still not noticing anything strange about the rocking chair next to it. Suddenly, before I could even touch the candy, the guy jumped up from under the sheet and screamed. He didn't just yell a little boo. It was a loud, deep scream that seemed to explode out of the black sheet. His arms flew out from under the fabric, making it look like he was growing giant black wings. I remember seeing the sheet rise up with his arms, the bottom edges flipping and fluttering like a bat in the dark. My heart felt like it jumped out of my chest. I remember feeling like my body went cold all over, almost numb. My knees felt weak, and for a second, it was like I couldn't move or breathe. Then I ran. I turned so fast I almost tripped over my own feet. I sprinted towards the stairs, jumping over the first few steps completely. My little boots hit the ground hard, and I remember feeling the shock in my ankles as I landed on the cold concrete sidewalk. I turned back towards him, breathing so hard my chest hurt. I pointed at him with my little hook hand, and I yelled so loud that my voice cracked. That weren't funny. I was angry. I wasn't just scared. I was mad that he had done that to me. I could feel my eyes watering, but I didn't want to cry in front of everyone. Everyone on the street was laughing. The kids behind me, the parents standing with their coffee cups, even the teenagers in costumes across the street. I could hear them laughing and talking about how scared I looked, about how I jumped off the stairs like a superhero. The guy under the sheet threw his hands up in the air, and I saw him smile under the porch light. He said something like that made his night, and then he walked back into his house, holding the sheet in one hand and closing the front door behind him. I remember standing there on the sidewalk for a long time, just staring at the porch. My mom walked up to me and put her hand on my shoulder, gently pushing me to keep walking to the next house. I didn't want to. My legs felt like jelly, and my heart was still racing in my chest so hard I thought it might break my ribs. We kept walking, and I remember not saying anything for a while, just listening to the sound of my sister talking about how funny it was and how she wished she had recorded it. The rest of the night felt different after that. Every house we went to, I was scanning the porches for anyone sitting too still, anyone covered in a sheet or hiding behind decorations. I didn't enjoy the candy as much after that. My mom kept telling me it was okay, and it was just a joke, that he didn't mean to scare me that bad, but it didn't matter. In my mind, I kept seeing that black sheet rising up like a giant dark bird, the scream echoing in my ears even over the sound of kids yelling, "Trick or treat," down the street. For the next few years, every time Halloween came around, we would walk down that same street. I would see that house with its spiral bushes and wide porch. Even if he didn't do the black sheet trick again, I never went back up those stairs. I always skipped that house, no matter how good the candy was supposed to be. My sister would tease me about it, saying I was a scaredy cat, but I didn't care. I just didn't want to feel that kind of fear again. I stopped trick or treating when I was about 13. It just wasn't the same after a certain age. I started feeling embarrassed dressing up and walking house to house with little kids, so I stayed home and handed out candy instead. But even now, as an adult, when I drive down that street and pass that dark blue house with the white trim, I still remember that night so clearly. I remember my small hand reaching for the candy bowl, the cold air on my face, the smell of wet wood, and then that scream that froze my entire body. I remember how my feet left the ground as I jumped off those stairs, how hard my heart was beating, and how angry I felt standing on the sidewalk yelling at him while everyone laughed. That memory is burned into my mind forever. It's funny now, in a way. We still talk about it at family gatherings, especially on Halloween. My parents laugh about how high I jumped and how angry I was. My sister always tells the story to her friends, adding her own details to make it sound even funnier. But for me, it's not just funny. It's a reminder of how fear feels when you're small, how it feels to be surprised so deeply that your entire body reacts before your brain even understands what's happening. It's a reminder that sometimes, something as simple as a man under a sheet can make you feel like you're being attacked by a monster, even if you're just a little pirate with a plastic hook on a cold October night. I never went back to that house again. Even when I got older and went trick or treating with friends just for fun, we skipped it. It wasn't about the candy. It was about the feeling I got in my chest every time I thought about stepping back on that porch. That feeling never left me, even as I grew up and learned what real fear was in life. Somehow, the memory of that scream and that sheet rising up still felt like one of the scariest moments I ever experienced. And I think it always will. I remember that night so clearly even though it feels like a dream now. I don't know exactly how old I was, maybe 8 or 9. It was probably 2006. It was a Thursday night. I always liked Thursdays because it meant just one more day of school before the weekend. Me and my sister were in the playroom that night. We called it the playroom even though it was really just the room with our TV, old couch, and PS2. There were random toys and board games stacked in the corner next to the TV stand. We spent most of our evenings there because that's where we felt happiest after school. I remember sitting cross-legged on the floor with the PS2 controller in my hands. I think we were playing Crash Bandicoot that evening. My sister was sitting behind me on the couch with her legs tucked under her, eating a bowl of dry cereal as a snack. I remember her crunching loudly while I was trying to focus on a difficult jump in the game. The room was warm from the heater. It was cold outside, the windows covered with condensation. There was a little portable heater near the door that buzzed softly. Our house always felt safe. That was something I never thought about until that night. The lights were bright, the carpet felt soft under my feet, and there was the smell of dinner still floating through the hallway from earlier that evening. I think we had chicken and rice that night, and my mom had baked chocolate chip cookies for us after dinner, so the house smelled sweet and homey. It was around 8:30. I know because I had looked at the clock on the TV right before it happened. My mom came downstairs. I didn't see her at first, but I heard her footsteps, and then I heard my dad say something. His voice sounded normal but quiet, like he didn't want to wake someone up. Then I heard my mom gasp loudly, the kind of gasp where you pull in so much air you almost choke. My sister immediately paused her chewing and looked at me with wide eyes. We didn't say anything to each other, but we both felt it. Something was wrong. I put the controller down on the floor and stood up slowly. My sister hopped off the couch and followed me out into the hallway. The playroom was right across from the kitchen, so as soon as we stepped out we could see my mom standing there with her hands over her mouth. Her eyes were big and shiny like she was about to cry. My dad was standing near the front door with his hands in his pockets. His face was pale and tight like he was thinking really hard. He wasn't angry or anything, just serious. I didn't understand what was happening. At that age, everything serious felt like trouble. I thought maybe we were in trouble for leaving our school bags in the kitchen or something. We walked closer and my dad turned and looked at us. His eyes looked tired but calm. He looked back at my mom and then back at us again. I didn't ask anything. My sister didn't either. We just stood there awkwardly because it felt wrong to talk. My dad sighed a little and finally told us what happened. He said just a few minutes earlier, a man walked into our house. He didn't knock. He didn't ring the doorbell. He just opened the door and walked in. I felt my chest get tight as soon as he said that. My sister reached out and grabbed my arm. I could feel her small, cold fingers squeezing me. My dad told us that the man asked him for gas money. I couldn't really understand it at first. I didn't get why someone would just walk into a house and ask for money. But my dad explained to my mom that the man clearly had mental problems. My dad was a doctor, so he always seemed to know things about people just by looking at them. He said the man seemed confused and lost. While my dad was telling us, I kept looking at the front door. It was closed now, but it felt different. Before that night, it was just a door, something normal that kept the cold air out. But in that moment, it felt so thin, like if someone wanted to come in, they could just do it any time they wanted. My stomach felt weird, like when you think you're going to be sick, but nothing comes up. I didn't like thinking about someone standing in our hallway, looking around like they belonged there. That was our house. That was our safe place. My dad said he stayed calm and told the man he didn't have any gas money and then gently walked him outside. I pictured my dad just placing his hand on the man's shoulder and walking with him to the door like he was guiding a lost child. It made me feel proud of my dad, but also scared at the same time because I knew if the man had done anything violent, my dad would have been the one to protect us. After that, we all went outside. My mom told us to put on our coats because it was freezing out there. We put on our winter jackets and slippers and stepped out onto the front porch. The air was sharp and cold, and it made my nose hurt to breathe in too deeply. I remember my sister pulling her hood over her head and standing so close to me that our arms were pressed together. When we looked around, there were other families outside too. Neighbors we didn't really know well were standing in their driveways, hugging themselves against the cold. Everyone was looking at the police car parked a few houses down. The flashing lights from the police car lit up the whole street with red and blue pulses. It made everything look scary and unreal. I saw two policemen walking a man in handcuffs towards the car. The man looked thin and tired. His hair was messy, and he was wearing a gray hoodie that was stained with something dark on the front. His head was hanging down like he was too tired to hold it up. He didn't fight or yell. He just let them walk him to the car. I remember feeling so many things at once. I felt scared because that man had been inside our house. I felt sad because he looked so lost and small when the police were walking him away. I felt confused because I didn't know why someone would do that. I felt angry because I didn't want anyone like that coming near my family again. One of the policemen said something to the neighbors, but I couldn't really hear him. My dad later told us that the man had stolen his dad's van and drove 50 miles away before running out of gas. He didn't know what to do, so he just walked into someone's house to ask for help. They said he had mental problems. I didn't really know what that meant back then, but I knew it was bad enough to make him do something like that. After they put him in the car and drove away, everyone slowly went back inside their houses. The street went quiet again. Just the sound of cold wind rustling the dead leaves along the sidewalk. When we got back inside, my dad locked the door right away. I watched him turn the little lock and then pull on the handle to make sure it was shut tight. My mom kept walking around the house, checking all the other doors and windows. I could tell she was shaken up, even though she was trying to act calm. She walked back and forth from the kitchen to the hallway, touching the counters, moving a dish here and there, just keeping her hands busy. Me and my sister went back to the playroom, but we didn't turn the game back on. We just sat there on the couch under a blanket. I remember staring at the TV screen that was turned off and seeing our reflections in the dark glass. We both looked small and quiet. I could feel my sister leaning against my arm. She smelled like her cereal and the shampoo Mom used on her that morning. Her hair was still a little tangled from the day. I felt like if I moved too fast, I might scare her more, so I just sat still. That night when I went to bed, I lay under my blanket staring at the ceiling for a long time. I could hear my parents talking downstairs in low voices. I couldn't hear their words, but I could tell they were both worried. The house felt different. It didn't feel like the same safe place it was before. It felt like it could break at any time. I turned onto my side and looked at the wall, tracing the glow-in-the-dark star stickers with my eyes. I thought about the man's face, how tired he looked, how confused. I thought about how he just opened our door like it was his own house. For the next year or two, every night before I went to sleep, I would get up out of bed, walk to the front door, and check if it was locked. Even if I saw the lock was turned, I would still grab the handle and pull it just to be sure. Then I would check the back door too. My sister started doing it with me sometimes. She would follow me down the stairs in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes sleepily, and stand there while I checked the door. Then we would go back up to bed together, not saying anything, just walking quietly in the dark hallway. It's been so many years since that happened. Now I understand it better. The man wasn't evil. He wasn't dangerous. He was just lost in his mind, broken in a way no one could see. But that night, as a child, he was the scariest thing in the world to me because he showed me that our door was never really as strong as I thought it was. Anyone could come in if we forgot to lock it. Anyone could step into our warm, safe house and bring the cold in with them. And that thought followed me for a long time after, every night before bed, checking and checking again, making sure the door was locked tight. When I was 3 years old, my family moved into a new house. It was a brand new house, freshly built, with white siding, gray roof shingles, and concrete steps that smelled like cement dust every morning when the sun hit them. The street was still half finished. There were piles of gravel, wooden planks stacked on bare earth, cement trucks parked for days, and workers moving around in fluorescent vests and muddy boots, calling to each other in voices that carried through the cold morning air. Our house was the first one finished on the street, and I remember my mom telling people that we were the first family on the block. She sounded proud when she said it. Inside, everything smelled like new paint and carpet glue. The beige carpet felt scratchy and stiff under my bare feet. The white walls were empty except for the thermostat and the electrical outlets that looked like little surprised faces staring at me wherever I went. I had a small room at the end of the hall, next to my sister's room, and my parents' room was down the hall on the other side. My window looked out into the empty lot next door where weeds grew in patches, and where I saw rabbits sometimes in the early mornings, sitting still with their ears twitching. By the time I turned 4.5, I knew every corner of that house. I knew the smell of the carpet in my room, the slightly sweet smell of the wood dresser where my clothes were folded, the hollow echo of my small feet walking from my bed to the door, the quiet creaks in the floorboards near my closet. I spent many nights awake for no reason. I was at the age where I believed that if I tried hard enough, I could get X-ray vision like Superman. Every night, if I woke up, I would stare at my hand and focus until my eyes burned, hoping to see through skin and bone to whatever was on the other side. I remember clearly the Toronto Blue Jays clock on my wall. It had a bright blue frame and white face with red stitching printed on it to look like a baseball. The ticking sound was slow and loud at night when everything else was quiet. That clock is one of the clearest images in my mind from that age. When I woke up in the middle of the night, it was always the first thing I saw glowing in the darkness. Its short, stubby hands pointed to whatever time it was, and that night it pointed to just after 1 a.m. I sat up, pushing my blanket down to my lap. The air felt cold on my skin. My room was completely dark except for the faint glow from my clock. I lifted my hand in front of my face and started focusing on it. I imagined my eyes becoming like Superman's eyes, powerful enough to see through anything. I thought about it so hard I felt like my head was shaking inside. I wanted to see the bones in my fingers or the blue veins under my skin. I held my breath without realizing, my ears ringing slightly with the silence. It was quiet for a long time, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're underwater. Then I heard a small whisper. It sounded like it came from the corner near my dresser. It was so soft I wasn't even sure it was a voice. My sister's room was next to mine, and she was only a year older. I thought maybe it was her. Maybe she was awake too, talking in her sleep or reading a book. I didn't pay much attention to it. I just kept staring at my hand, squinting, focusing, imagining the skin becoming invisible. My eyes felt heavy and itchy, but I didn't want to stop. Then I heard a man call my name. It was clear and low, like someone trying to speak quietly but firmly. My whole body froze. My skin felt tight all over me, like I was shrinking. I couldn't move. I couldn't even put my hand down. My father worked nights back then. He never came home until 4 in the morning. My mom slept with her door closed, and my sister was too young to do a voice like that. I didn't know who it was. I didn't know if I was dreaming or awake, but it felt too real to be a dream. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest, and my throat felt tight like I was going to throw up. The voice laughed. It was a quiet laugh, like someone trying not to wake anyone up. Then it said it was going to get me. The words were slow and calm, not loud or angry, just calm like it was telling me something normal. I sat there staring into the darkness, my hands still in front of my face. I couldn't breathe properly. My chest felt hollow. For 5 seconds after it stopped talking, there was complete silence in the room. I could hear my own breathing, short and shaky. I didn't think. I just screamed. I screamed as loud as I could. It was like my body took over before my brain could catch up. My scream woke everyone up. I heard footsteps thundering down the hall. My door burst open, and my mother came in. She flicked on the light, and I squinted against the sudden brightness. She was wearing a long nightgown with little pink flowers on it, and her hair was messy and stuck out around her face. I was crying so hard I couldn't even speak properly. My chest felt like it was squeezing itself tight with each sob. She sat on my bed, the mattress dipping under her weight. I felt her arm wrap around my shoulders, her other hand smoothing my hair back from my forehead. She stayed with me for what felt like forever. I could hear my sister standing in the hallway, half asleep, rubbing her eyes, watching us. After a long time, my mom asked me what happened. I told her between broken breaths. I asked if it was Dad, if he came home early and was playing a joke on me. She shook her head and told me Dad was still at work. She said I must have been dreaming. I wanted to believe her. I wanted it to be a dream so bad, but it didn't feel like one. I felt awake the whole time. My sheets were cold. My clock was ticking. My hand was still tingling from holding it up so long. It all felt too real. After that night, I was never the same. I never again slept with my door closed. I always left it open just a crack, enough to see the light from the hallway or to hear if someone was coming. At least once a week, for years after, I would wake up in the middle of the night with my heart racing and a tight feeling in my chest like something was pressing down on me. I would yell for my mom. Sometimes I didn't even know why. I just felt like something wasn't right, like something was in the room with me, even if I couldn't see it. My mom would come in, tired and quiet, and sit with me until I calmed down enough to sleep again. That fear stayed with me through my childhood. Before that night, I was confident. I wasn't scared of the dark or of being alone in my room. But after that, everything changed. I became afraid of shadows, of the quiet, of being alone anywhere. If I went to the bathroom at night, I would run there and run back, flicking the light on and off as fast as I could so I didn't have to stand still in the dark. If I heard a noise, even just the house creaking or the wind outside, my heart would race and I would feel that same tightness in my chest. The house was new. There was no history to it. The land it was built on used to be farmland. Nothing but empty fields and corn stalks that rustled in the wind. My parents still live in that house. They've repainted the walls, put in new carpet, changed the furniture. But when I visit them, I still avoid my old room at night. The memories are too strong. Sometimes, if I walk past the open door in the dark, I feel that same tight feeling in my chest like I'm a little kid again, sitting on my bed with my hand in front of my face, trying to see through my skin while something I couldn't see watched me from the shadows. I don't know what it was that night. Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe it was a half-dream, half-awake kind of thing that kids get sometimes. All I know is that it felt real, and it changed me. That one night turned me from a fearless child into someone who jumped at every sound. It's been years now, decades even, but I still think about it. I think about that quiet laugh and that calm voice telling me it was going to get me. I think about how after that night, the darkness never felt safe again. Even now, as an adult, if I wake up in the middle of the night and look at my hand in the dim light, I feel a small part of me waiting to hear that voice again, waiting to feel that same cold fear that turned my childhood into something I never really grew out of. But I never heard it again. It was only that one night that left a mark deeper than anything else in that house. It's strange how one small moment, just a whisper in the dark, can change how you see the world forever. The house is still there, my parents still live there, and nothing else ever happened. But that room never felt safe again. Not for me, and I don't think it ever will. I was about 6 or 7 years old when this happened to me. I still remember it clearly even though so many years have passed. At that age, I used to sleep in my parents' room almost every night. It wasn't because I was scared of my own room or anything like that. It was more because I felt comfortable being near my mom. I would walk into their room at night with my blanket and quietly wake my dad up. He never complained about it. He would just sigh softly, get up, and walk to my room to sleep in my bed so that I could sleep with my mom. I felt safe next to her, hearing her breathing and feeling the warmth of her body near me as I fell asleep. That night was the same as any other night. I had fallen asleep quickly, curled up close to my mom, feeling the softness of the blanket against my face. The small nightlight plugged into the socket near the dresser glowed faintly, casting a dim yellow light across the room. I always liked that light because it made the darkness feel less empty. I remember dreaming about being at school and playing on the swings. I was laughing and flying high in the air, feeling like I was touching the sky. Then suddenly my dream changed, and I was just standing still in a gray space. I don't remember what I was thinking in that moment in the dream, but it felt quiet, like something was waiting for me to notice it. I woke up suddenly, my eyes opening wide into the dark room. At first, I didn't know why I woke up. I could hear my mom's breathing next to me, soft and steady. I could feel my own heart beating a little fast for no reason. I lay there for a few seconds, staring at the dark shapes in the room lit up by the faint nightlight. The dresser, the closet door, my mom's handbag hanging on the doorknob. All those shapes looked normal, but they also looked different in the dark. I felt uneasy. I didn't know why, but something was telling me to get up and go back to my room. I didn't want to leave my mom's side, but the feeling was so strong in my chest that I sat up and quietly slipped out of the bed, holding my blanket around me like a cape. My feet felt cold on the tiled floor as I walked slowly out of their room and into the hallway. The hallway was dark, but I could see the faint light coming from my room at the end of it. That was from the street lamp outside. My room faced the street, so at night the orange-yellow glow from the lamp would filter through the thin curtains and make my room look dimly lit even without a lamp on. I remember walking towards my room, feeling that coldness on my feet, and hearing the quiet creaks of the wooden floor as I stepped carefully. I reached my room and stood in the doorway for a few seconds. My bed was empty, of course, because my dad was sleeping in it. I walked inside and saw him lying there, turned to his side, his back facing me. His body rose and fell gently as he breathed. Seeing him there made me feel a bit calmer for a moment. I thought maybe I would just climb into bed with him and go to sleep there, but then I felt something strange inside me again. It was like a small voice was telling me to go look out the window. I didn't want to. I really didn't want to. But the feeling got stronger, like something pulling at my chest, making it hard to ignore. I walked towards the window slowly, each step feeling heavy. I pulled the curtain to the side just enough to peek outside. I could see the street lit up by the lamp. The orange light made the sidewalk and road look shiny, even though it wasn't wet. I could see the front porch clearly from that window. It was empty like always, just the two old chairs sitting there next to the small table where my dad sometimes kept his cigarette ashtray. But then I saw something that made my heart stop for a second. There was a shape standing on the porch, right next to the front door. It wasn't moving. It was just standing there like a statue. My chest felt tight, and I held my breath as I stared at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It looked like a boy. A small boy, maybe a little older than me, wearing what looked like old clothes. I didn't know anything about fashion back then, but later when I grew up, I realized he was dressed like kids from the 1930s. He had short pants with suspenders and a flat cap on his head, like the ones I saw in old movies about newspaper boys. I didn't know what to do. I just stood there, staring at that shadow, feeling my knees go weak. The street lamp wasn't bright enough to show me his face clearly, but I could see that it was turned towards the door, like he was waiting for someone to open it. I felt scared but also confused. Why was there a boy standing on our porch in the middle of the night dressed like that? Why wasn't he moving or knocking or doing anything? I stood there for what felt like forever, just staring. I was too scared to move, but too curious to leave. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. My hands felt cold. Finally, I let the curtain drop back into place, and I turned around. I walked back to the bed slowly, looking at my dad still sleeping peacefully. Part of me wanted to wake him up and tell him what I saw, but something stopped me. I don't know why, but I felt like if I told him, something bad would happen. I decided to just go back to my parents' room. I walked out of my room and down the hallway again, feeling the cold tiles under my feet. When I entered their room, it felt so warm compared to my room. The night light was still glowing softly. I climbed into bed next to my mom and pulled the blanket up to my chin. I turned to face her, feeling her warmth near me. I wanted to forget what I saw, to pretend it was just my imagination. But then I felt something strange again, like someone was behind me. I didn't want to look. I really didn't. But the feeling got stronger and stronger until my chest felt so tight that I couldn't breathe properly. I turned my head slowly and looked at the side of the bed, near my pillow. My heart almost stopped. The same shadow was there. The small boy, dressed the same way, with the same flat cap on his head, just standing there on my side of the bed. He wasn't moving. He wasn't doing anything. Just standing there, like he had been on the porch. The night light illuminated him enough that I could see his outline clearly, but I couldn't see his face. It was like a shadow where his face should have been. I lay there frozen, my eyes wide open, staring at him. My mind felt blank. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know why he was there. I didn't know why he was looking at me. I opened my mouth and tried to say something, but my throat felt dry and tight. I forced out a small hello, but it came out so weak that even I could barely hear it. He didn't move. He didn't respond. I said it again, a little louder this time, trying to keep my voice calm even though my whole body felt like it was shaking inside. Still nothing. He just stood there, silent. I said it a third time, almost whispering it now because I felt like if I spoke too loudly something bad would happen. But he didn't do anything. It was like he wasn't really there, but at the same time he was. I couldn't understand it. My eyes started to burn with tears, and I felt them roll down my cheeks and onto the pillow. My chest hurt from holding my breath so much. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled the blanket over my head and curled up close to my mom, pressing my face into her back. I felt her warmth and her steady breathing, and it made me feel safe again, like nothing could touch me under that blanket. My tears kept falling quietly as I lay there, listening to her breath, feeling her warmth. Slowly, my eyes grew heavy, and I fell asleep, even though I didn't want to. I didn't dream after that. It was just blackness until morning. When I woke up, the sunlight was coming through the windows. The room looked warm and normal again. My mom was already up, probably making breakfast in the kitchen. I sat up in bed and rubbed my eyes, trying to shake off the leftover fear from the night. Part of me wanted to run to my room and look out the window again to see if the boy was still there. Another part of me never wanted to look out that window again. I decided to just stay there for a while, sitting on the bed and listening to the sound of plates clinking in the kitchen. My heart felt calm again. My feet felt warm under the blanket. Later that day, I tried to tell myself that maybe I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe I was half asleep and dreaming with my eyes open. Maybe it was just a shadow from the tree outside or the street lamp casting some weird shape on the porch and in the room. I never saw that boy again after that night, but I never forgot about him either. Even now, when I walk past my old room, I feel that small tightness in my chest again, like the memory is living somewhere deep inside me, waiting to come out whenever I let my guard down. As I grew up, I realized there were no ghosts in this world, at least not in the way we think about them. There are only shadows and shapes that our minds try to make sense of. Maybe I saw the shadow of a branch or a reflection from a passing car. Maybe my half-asleep brain turned that shadow into the boy I saw. Maybe I had watched some old movie that week, and my mind created him in that moment. But even knowing all that, the fear I felt that night was real. The feeling of seeing something that shouldn't be there, of feeling watched in the dark, of being too scared to move or speak. That was real. I never slept in my parents' room after that night. I stayed in my own room, under my own blankets, listening to the sound of cars passing outside and the wind blowing against the window. Even though I was scared, I forced myself to sleep there. I told myself I had to be brave. I had to grow up and learn that shadows are just shadows, and fear is just a feeling that passes with the morning sun. And it did pass. The sun always rises, and the shadows always fade away. That's what I learned after that night. I was a Navy kid my whole life, always moving from place to place. New schools, new houses, new friends every couple of years. By the time I turned 14, my dad had finally retired and we settled down. But before that, my life was just cardboard boxes and different front doors. When I was around 8 or 9 years old, we were living in Newport, Rhode Island. We lived in a Navy housing development, the kind with rows of attached units that all looked almost the same from the outside. Ours had just been remodeled, so everything inside was clean and white and smelled like fresh paint and carpet glue. My best friend at the time was a boy named Michael. He lived a few units down from me in the only house on our street that hadn't been remodeled yet. His place looked older from the outside, the paint chipped in places, and the wood railing on the small front porch was warped from years of rain and sun. We used to spend all our time together. After school, I'd throw my backpack down and we'd ride bikes around the neighborhood or walk to the playground near the main road. On weekends, we'd spend the whole day playing in the small patches of woods behind the units, picking up sticks and pretending they were swords, climbing trees, or finding random trash left behind by other kids and turning it into treasure for our imaginary games. Michael always came to my house to sleep over, bringing his sleeping bag and his stuffed lion he couldn't sleep without. We'd set up on the living room floor and stay up late playing with my toys or watching movies until we passed out. He never let me stay the night at his house, though. I didn't really care because his place felt different. I'd only been inside twice, and even now as an adult, I still think about how weird it felt. The second time I was there was the last time. We were sitting in his living room watching Power Rangers after school. His living room looked so old compared to mine. The carpet was brown and thin in spots, and the couch cushions were sunken down like they'd been sat on for years. His mom was in the kitchen making us grilled cheese sandwiches. I remember she had a radio on the counter that was always playing country music softly, just enough to hear it mixed with the noises of her moving plates and pans around. While we were sitting there, I heard her call out something like, "Gosh darn it, why didn't anyone tell me we're out of cheese?" It was early afternoon, and the sun was coming in through the windows, making everything look warmer than it felt. She came into the living room and told us she was running down to the NEX convenience store to grab some cheese. The store was just down the road past the stop sign, so she'd be back quick. She left and we kept watching Power Rangers, leaning back in our chairs, my feet swinging above the carpet. I remember thinking how quiet his house felt with her gone, and how I could hear the creaks in the walls and the humming of the fridge from the kitchen. About 10 minutes later, we heard the front door open and close. She didn't say anything to us, so we just kept watching TV. Then suddenly she screamed. Not like a little scream, but a full scream that made both of us jump so hard we almost tipped our chairs backwards. For a second we just stared at each other wide-eyed. Then we both started laughing because it sounded so ridiculous, like she was playing a prank. I turned around in my chair, expecting her to be standing there in the living room looking at us with a grin or something. But she wasn't. She was still in the kitchen screaming again, calling for Michael in this scared, angry voice. We ran into the kitchen, the floor cold under my socks, and saw her standing there with her purse still on her shoulder, staring around the kitchen like she didn't know what she was looking at. Every single cabinet was open. The cupboard doors were all wide open. The drawers were pulled out so far they looked like they'd fall out of the slots, and the refrigerator door was hanging open too, all the cold air pouring out into the kitchen. She turned to Michael and asked if he did it, her voice shaking so bad. We both shook our heads hard. She told us to go to my house to finish watching TV, her hands trembling as she pulled out her phone and dialed Michael's dad. We left quickly, walking fast down the sidewalk to my house, our shoes crunching on the gravel that lined the edges of the pavement. We finished watching Power Rangers at my place, and then whatever show came on after it. Michael was quiet the whole time, sitting with his knees pulled up to his chest on the couch. After a while he said he should go home and see what was happening. He left without saying much. When my mom came in from folding laundry, I told her what happened. She sat down beside me on the couch, her eyes going kind of sad. She told me that Michael's mom had been experiencing weird things in their house for a long time, but they didn't like to talk about it. She told me I wasn't allowed to go over there anymore. I didn't really understand it back then. I thought maybe it was just an old house being creaky and weird, or that Michael's mom was just dramatic. But later my mom told me a few things that Michael's mom had told her over coffee once. One of them was about when Michael had pneumonia a few months before the kitchen thing. He was upstairs in his room resting in bed. His dad was at work, and his mom was cleaning downstairs. She heard his door slam shut, then open, then slam shut again. She thought he was getting up to go to the bathroom or something, so she went upstairs to check on him. She opened the door, and he was lying in the same exact position, half asleep, barely even awake. She thought maybe she imagined it, so she left his door open and went back downstairs to clean. A few minutes later, the door slammed shut again, even louder this time. She walked upstairs, her feet heavy with fear, and tried to open the door, but it was locked. She knocked, called his name, but there was no answer. She shoved her shoulder against the door until it finally popped open, and there he was, asleep in the exact same spot, except his blankets were thrown everywhere and his closet door was wide open. The inside so dark she couldn't see anything but shadows. She woke him up and brought him downstairs to sleep on the couch where she could see him. Then a few weeks later, Michael was staying over at my house for the night. His dad was doing some overnight duty, so his mom was alone. She woke up in the middle of the night to the toilet flushing over and over again. She said it was so fast there wasn't even enough time for the bowl to finish filling before it flushed again. She got out of bed and walked down the dark hallway towards the bathroom. As soon as she reached the doorframe, it stopped. She lifted the lid off the toilet tank to see if something was broken, but it looked normal. She went back to bed, pulling the covers up around her neck, staring at the shadows in the corners of her room. She was just about to fall back asleep when it started flushing again. She sat up in bed, her heart pounding so hard she felt like she could hear it in her ears. She walked halfway down the hallway and said hello, her voice small and shaky. As soon as she spoke, it stopped again. She stood there for a minute, listening to the silence that felt so heavy it pressed on her shoulders, then turned to walk back to her bedroom. That's when she heard the coat closet door downstairs slam shut so hard it echoed up through the floor into her feet. She ran back to her room, locked the door, and called Navy Housing Security, telling them she thought there was someone in her house. They showed up a few minutes later, using their keys to come in when she was too afraid to go downstairs to unlock the door. They called out if anyone was there, their voices echoing off the walls. She finally came out of her room and walked downstairs with them, her hands shaking so bad she had to hold the railing with both hands. They checked the whole house. Every door and window was locked tight, just like she had left them before going to bed. But the coat closet door was wide open, coats and shoes thrown out onto the carpet in front of it, like someone had ripped everything out in a hurry. About a month after the kitchen cabinet thing, Michael's family moved away. His dad put in a request to be transferred to another base, and they ended up getting sent to New Jersey. After they left, no one moved into their unit. It stayed empty the whole time we lived there, the windows dark at night, the little porch gathering leaves and dirt from the wind. Sometimes when I'd ride my bike past it to go meet other kids at the playground, I'd look up at the windows and wonder if there was anything standing behind the curtains, looking out. But I never saw anything. I never went back inside that house again, and I was glad. Even though I didn't understand it then, I knew that house wasn't right. Even now, when I think about it as an adult, I feel my chest get tight like it's hard to breathe. I never heard from Michael again after they moved. I don't know what happened to them, or if anything ever happened at their new house. But I still remember his mom's face in the kitchen that day, the way her eyes looked like she was staring at something none of us could see, and the way she never let me back inside again. It felt like that house wasn't theirs at all, like it belonged to something else, and they were just living in it, waiting for it to finally take back what it wanted. After school that day, we all walked together in a big group. There were 5 of us, maybe 6. I can't remember exactly who was there, but I remember the feeling of that day clearly. It was warm, bright, and there wasn't a single cloud in the sky. We were laughing and pushing each other lightly, joking about teachers and homework, and how boring maths had been. We were 10 years old, and everything felt easy back then. We reached my friend's house in about 10 minutes. She was one of the richest kids in our class. Her house was massive, like something you saw on TV shows. Double gates at the entrance, a driveway that curved around to the garage, and the house itself stood with white pillars and huge windows. But the most impressive thing wasn't the house. It was her garden, though to call it a garden feels wrong even now. It was basically a small forest. The land at the back of their houses merged together. There were about 6 or 7 houses, each with huge backyards and no fences to divide them. It was like a private forest just for them. We all used to joke that she owned her own woods. Secretly, we were all jealous of it. That day was hot enough that the air felt heavy when you breathed it in. We went inside at first, dropped our bags in the hallway, kicked off shoes, and grabbed some juice boxes from the fridge. Her parents never minded us taking drinks. They worked till late most days, so the house felt empty even though it was so big. Her older brother was at football practice, so it was just us kids. We decided to play outside. The trees were tall and dark green, their leaves shaking softly in the breeze. Birds chirped here and there, and we saw a squirrel run up a trunk as we stepped onto the grass. The ground under the trees was shaded and cool. Dry leaves crunched under our feet, and small twigs snapped as we walked deeper into the woods. We were messing around at first. 2 of the boys started throwing acorns at each other, while the rest of us pretended to look for fairies and hollow logs. We spent nearly half an hour just playing like that. Then we realized we should probably head back for snacks before it got late. As we started walking back towards her house, weaving between thick tree trunks, we saw something odd ahead. It looked like a structure made out of wood. At first we thought it was just a fallen tree with broken branches sticking out, but as we got closer we realized it was something someone had built. It stood awkwardly between 2 trees, with bits of wood nailed together at different angles. Some planks were rotten, others were newer, and a few had moss growing on them. It was almost like someone tried to build a lookout platform or a tiny treehouse, but gave up halfway. It didn't even have walls or a roof, just a strange skeleton-like frame of wood. We all gathered around it. The air felt cooler there. One of my friends tried to climb onto it, but as soon as she put her weight on the bottom plank, it creaked so loud that a bird flew off from a nearby branch. She stepped back quickly, shaking her head. None of us wanted to risk standing on it after that. I ran my hand over the wood, and it felt rough, with splinters sticking out. We were about to walk away when one of the boys, I think his name was Ryan, wandered off a bit further. He called out for us to come quickly. We didn't run, but we walked fast towards where he was standing. As we reached him, we saw what he was pointing at. Hidden between some thick bushes and behind a cluster of 3 trees, there was a shed-like structure. It was made from the same kind of wood as the weird platform. Rough planks, some gray with age, some dark brown, all nailed together without care for how straight they were. The shed had no windows, just a single wooden door. It was slightly ajar. I remember the smell as we stepped closer. Damp wood, old leaves, and something else, something stale like old sweat. Ryan pushed the door open more. The hinges didn't squeak, but the whole door moved roughly, like it was rubbing against the frame. Inside was dark. Sunlight only reached in through the open door. As my eyes adjusted, I saw a bed. It wasn't really a bed like in a house. It was a raised wooden platform with a thin, stained mattress on top. The mattress was torn at one corner, with yellow foam sticking out. There was a gray blanket scrunched at one end. On the floor next to it was an empty plastic water bottle and what looked like a metal tin of beans. None of us stepped inside. We stood there in the doorway looking at it. The ground was covered with dead leaves and dirt, but the mattress looked like someone had slept on it recently. The blanket was in a shape that showed where someone's legs had been. The metal tin was clean, like it had been used, and then left there that morning. A single fly buzzed around our heads. The air felt damp and warm inside the shed, like the smell was sticking to our skin. I felt my stomach twist. My throat felt dry. We backed away quickly. No one said anything. We just started walking back to the house at a fast pace, all staying close together. When we reached the open grass again, the sunlight felt too bright. The warmth that had been comforting earlier now felt harsh. We went back inside the house without speaking. I remember wiping my hands on my shorts, even though I hadn't touched anything inside the shed. We all gathered in my friend's room. Her room was at the back of the house, on the second floor, with a window that overlooked the forest. The window was open because it was so hot. We sat on the floor with the fan on, eating crisps and biscuits. We tried to act normal, joking about school and watching silly videos on her small TV. But my mind kept drifting back to that shed. Who had built it? Who was sleeping there? Why was it hidden so far in the center of the woods? The sun started going down slowly, changing the color of the light in her room to a soft orange. We were all tired from running around and eating too much. It was quiet except for the fan and the occasional car driving past the front of the house. Then we heard it, a scream. It came from outside, from deep within the forest. It wasn't a normal scream like when kids play tag and someone pretends to be scared. It was loud, high-pitched, and sharp, like someone was screaming in pain or in anger. The sound cut through the quiet evening air and froze all of us where we sat. I felt goosebumps rise on my arms. My mouth felt dry. We didn't move towards the window. We didn't even get up to look. We just sat there staring at each other. After what felt like forever, but was probably just a few seconds, my friend stood up and shut the window. The sound didn't come again. None of us spoke about it. We watched cartoons until our parents came to pick us up. I remember sitting in the back seat of the car on the way home, watching the sunset turn the sky pink and feeling this heavy feeling in my chest. I kept thinking about that mattress, about the empty tin, about who was out there. I wondered if they knew we had been in their shed, if they saw us from between the trees. The next day at school we acted normal. We joked about other things. But I found out later that my friend told her dad about it that evening. Apparently, he went into the woods the next day with an axe. He smashed the shed apart and burned the wood in their backyard fire pit. I never saw it again. She told us he said there was nothing else there, just the shed and the platform. None of us ever went back deep into those woods again. We played in the garden near the house, but we never went beyond the first few trees. I never got an explanation for what was going on in those woods, who built that shed, or who screamed that evening. Sometimes I still think about it, late at night when it's quiet and I can hear every little creak and noise in the house. I wonder who was living there, why they were there, and what would have happened if we had gone back the next day and found them waiting for us. But I'll never know, and maybe it's better that way. I still think about that night sometimes, even though I try not to. It comes back to me at the most random times, like when I'm walking down a dark street alone or taking the trash out late at night. My chest tightens every time, just like it did back then. I was about 9 years old, maybe 10. It was after Hurricane Andrew tore through Florida and left everything messed up. Trees were ripped out of the ground with their roots showing like giant dead spiders. Some houses were just gone, flattened into broken wood and glass. Our neighborhood was a retirement area, mostly old people living quietly, their yards full of little garden decorations and wind chimes that never stopped clinking after the hurricane because the wind didn't leave for a long time. Even though the hurricane was gone, everything still felt broken and wrong. That night my mom asked me to take out the trash. She was tired and cooking dinner late because the power kept cutting out. We didn't have proper streetlights working at that time because most of them were knocked down or busted. I didn't want to go, but she was already frustrated, so I just grabbed the big plastic trash bag and walked out the front door. I remember how the screen door squeaked and then slammed behind me, making the dog bark once inside. The dumpsters were so far away. Maybe not a full mile, but when you're a kid it feels like forever, especially in the dark. I walked on the road because there wasn't really a sidewalk, only broken concrete slabs and grass patches full of fallen branches. Every few steps I had to look down to make sure I didn't trip over debris. The smell in the air was still weird even weeks after the hurricane. Wet rotting wood, broken tree sap, mud and moldy leaves. It stuck in my nose every time I breathed in. I was trying not to think about how dark it was. There were 2 ways to reach the dumpsters, like 2-car passageways. I took the usual route, which curves slightly left. My eyes adjusted enough to see shapes of parked cars and leaning stop signs. When I reached the split in the road, I just kept going left because it was habit. That's when I saw her for the first time. She was standing about 20 yards away from me, near a broken streetlight pole that was bent in half like a snapped pencil. At first I didn't think anything of it. Just an old lady out late. Maybe she couldn't sleep. She was wearing a white dress that reached down to her ankles. Her hair was long and black, and it fell over her shoulders so her face wasn't clear from that distance. I didn't stop walking. I didn't want to stand there staring and look rude. I told myself maybe she was just out getting fresh air. I reached the dumpster area, which was surrounded by a low brick wall with some of the bricks fallen out from the hurricane. The big metal trash bins were lined up against the far side. One of them had its lid blown off and lying on the ground nearby. I walked up to the bin, holding my breath because the smell was awful. Rotting food, wet paper, and that sickly sweet smell of old garbage that makes your stomach clench. I opened the lid of one of the bins and threw the trash bag in. The slam of the lid echoed into the night. For a moment I felt relieved. I was about to turn around and start walking back when I remembered the woman. Something felt off in my chest, like a small hand gripping my heart and squeezing. I turned my head to where she was standing before. She wasn't there. My eyes darted left and right, searching for her. Then I saw her. She was closer now, so much closer. She was about 5 to 8 yards away, standing just behind the brick wall near the dumpsters. I could see her better in the dim light that was leaking out from nearby windows. Her white dress was old and thin. I could see the outlines of her knees and shins through it. Her hair was still covering most of her face, but not completely anymore. That's when I saw her hand. She was holding something. I squinted in the dark. The object caught the faint orange light from a nearby porch lamp for just a second. It was a knife, a long kitchen knife with a straight blade that gleamed dully. My whole body went cold, like ice was poured into my veins. My knees felt like they would give out. She didn't move, just stood there staring. I could hear my own breathing getting louder and faster in my ears. My chest rose and fell so quickly it felt like I couldn't catch a full breath. My stomach twisted with fear. I didn't think about anything else. I just turned and ran. I ran harder than I ever had in my life. The world blurred around me as my feet slammed against the broken concrete and scattered branches. I didn't look back. I was too scared of what I might see if I did. My heart was beating so hard it felt like it would burst out of my chest. The cold air burned in my lungs with every gasping breath. I remember the way my legs almost buckled under me as I ran past fallen palm fronds and pieces of old roofing that littered the ground. My arms pumped by my sides without thinking. I ran past dark houses with boarded-up windows, past the twisted metal gate that used to guard the entrance to the retirement community. The only sound was my own footsteps pounding the pavement and my heartbeat thundering in my ears. My feet finally hit the front step of my house. I almost fell forward when I grabbed the doorknob. I yanked the door open and stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind me so hard the whole frame shook. I locked it with trembling hands and just stood there, breathing hard, feeling sweat drip down my neck and back. My legs felt weak like jelly. I didn't tell my mom what happened that night. She was already stressed from the hurricane damage and fighting with the insurance people every day. I just told her I threw out the trash and went to my room. I lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling, the shadows from the broken blinds moving every time the wind blew outside. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her standing there in that white dress with the knife in her hand, her hair covering her face, standing so still and quiet in the darkness. The next day I woke up with my muscles, sore like I had been running for miles. I didn't take out the trash alone at night after that. I always made excuses to take it out before the sun went down or asked my older brother to go with me. Weeks passed, and I didn't see her again. Life moved on. The hurricane damage slowly got fixed. People replaced their roofs and fences, streetlights got repaired, and the air stopped smelling like wet rot. But I never forgot. Sometimes I wonder if she was real, or if my scared kid mind just imagined her holding that knife in the dark. But deep down, I know what I saw. I remember the glint of the blade catching the light, clear as day. Maybe she was a confused old woman from the retirement homes. Maybe she was dangerous. Maybe she needed help. I'll never know. All I know is that night taught me something I never forgot. The scariest things in the world aren't ghosts or monsters hiding under your bed. They're the real people standing quietly in the darkness when you least expect them, holding something sharp in their hand, and staring at you without making a sound. I woke up that morning feeling like it would be just another normal day. I didn't have work that day, so I decided I would go out to the woods behind my neighborhood to walk and maybe clear my mind for a while. Those woods stretched out for miles. A lot of people used to walk there, but not many went deep inside because it was easy to get lost if you didn't know the trails. I packed my water bottle in my small black backpack, threw in a granola bar, and put on my old running shoes. I left my house at around 8 a.m., feeling good about being outside before the day got too hot. The air felt cool when I stepped onto the small dirt trail leading into the trees. I could hear birds calling out all around me, and the smell of dry pine needles mixed with the earthy dirt under my feet. As I walked further in, the sounds of cars from the road behind me faded until all I could hear was the crunching of my steps, the rustle of leaves, and the faraway calls of crows. I walked for about an hour, taking turns I had memorized from the times I had been here before. My mind wandered to everything going on in my life. The bills I had to pay, the projects I hadn't finished, and the feeling of being stuck. But walking always helped me think clearer. After about another 20 minutes, I reached a small clearing I liked to sit in. There was a large flat rock under a tree that gave some shade. I sat down on it, took off my bag, and drank some water. I stayed there for a while, looking up at the bits of sky showing through the leaves above me, thinking about how quiet it felt out here compared to my normal life. I could hear a woodpecker tapping somewhere nearby. I closed my eyes, listening to that tapping echo faintly across the woods. When I opened my eyes again, I noticed something strange in the dirt a little way in front of me. It looked like the trail of a dragging foot, leading off into a bush on the left side of the clearing. I felt my stomach twist a bit. It didn't look like an animal trail. It was a thin, straight line with deeper scuffs in the dirt, almost like someone had been dragged or someone was limping heavily. I felt uneasy, but tried to brush it off. Maybe it was a deer that had injured its leg and dragged it along. I forced myself to keep calm, picked up my bag, and kept walking on the trail heading deeper into the woods. I walked another mile or so. The trail narrowed, and the trees grew closer together. It felt darker here, with only bits of sun hitting the ground in thin slashes of light. I noticed the forest smelled stronger here too, like wet moss and old fallen leaves rotting into the dirt. My steps felt louder on the ground, echoing a little in the silence. I felt the hairs on my arms stand up. I didn't know why, but something felt off. It was the kind of feeling that made you want to turn around and leave, but I forced myself to keep going. After a while, I came to a spot where the trail split in two directions. I usually went right, which looped back toward the edge of the woods, but for some reason that day, I chose to go left. I thought it might be nice to explore somewhere I hadn't been before. As I walked, the trail grew even narrower, and after about 10 minutes, it almost disappeared under fallen branches and leaves. I kept going, stepping carefully over a fallen tree trunk, feeling the rough bark scrape against my leg as I climbed over. I could hear insects buzzing near my ear, and I waved them away, feeling sweat start to gather on the back of my neck. Then I saw something that made me stop dead. Lying off to the side of the path was a black backpack. It was half hidden under a small bush, and it looked old and dirty. I looked around, feeling my chest tighten. There was no one in sight. The woods were silent except for the distant call of a crow. I took a few steps closer and crouched down to look at the bag. It was covered in dirt and pine needles, like it had been here for a while. Part of the zipper was broken off. I felt a strong sense of dread build up in my chest. I didn't touch the bag. I just stared at it for a long time, feeling my heart thudding harder with each passing second. I stood up, looking around again. That uneasy feeling was turning into fear now. My mind raced with questions. Who left this here? Where were they? Why hadn't they come back for it? I felt like I shouldn't be standing there, like I was trespassing in a place I wasn't meant to be. I turned around and started walking back the way I came, but the trail seemed different now. I couldn't find the fallen tree trunk I had climbed over. The trail looked less clear, almost like it had disappeared under the thick layer of leaves and branches. Panic started to creep in. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself I must have just walked a little further than I thought. I kept walking, looking for anything I recognized. After about 15 minutes of walking in what I thought was the right direction, I realized I was completely lost. My heart started beating, so hard I could hear it in my ears. I stopped and took out my water bottle, taking a long drink to calm myself down. The water tasted warm now, and my mouth felt dry again almost immediately. I tried to remember all the advice I had ever heard about being lost in the woods. Stay calm, look for landmarks, listen for roads or water. I stood still and closed my eyes, trying to hear anything that would tell me which direction to go. But all I could hear was the sound of birds and the breeze rustling through the leaves. I started walking again, this time trying to keep in a straight line, hoping it would eventually lead me out. The ground was uneven, covered in roots and small rocks, and I almost twisted my ankle a few times. I could feel sweat dripping down my back, making my shirt stick to me. My breath felt shallow and fast, and I kept trying to slow it down so I didn't start hyperventilating. I walked for what felt like an hour. My legs were starting to feel weak, and my stomach hurt with hunger. I stopped to eat my granola bar, sitting on a small rock. As I chewed it slowly, I felt tears well up in my eyes. I blinked them back, looking up at the sky. The sun had moved across and was starting to drop lower. Shadows grew longer on the forest floor, making everything look darker and more unfriendly. I knew if I didn't find my way out soon, I would have to spend the night here, and the thought made my chest tighten with fear. After eating, I stood up and kept walking. I didn't know what else to do but keep moving. As I walked, I started hearing sounds that made my stomach twist. Crunching leaves, sticks breaking behind me. At first, I thought it was just animals, but it felt different. The sounds would stop when I stopped. They would start again when I started walking. I tried to tell myself it was just my fear making me paranoid, but deep down I knew something was following me. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see. I just kept walking faster, my eyes scanning the ground so I didn't trip. The sounds kept following me. I felt like I couldn't breathe properly anymore. My chest hurt from how tight my lungs felt. My mouth was so dry I could barely swallow. At one point, I thought I saw movement between the trees to my right, a dark shape moving quickly behind the trunks. I forced myself to keep going, ignoring the shaking in my legs. I could feel the rough straps of my bag digging into my shoulders with each step. The forest around me seemed darker now, like the trees were leaning in closer, blocking out more of the fading light. Finally, after what felt like forever, I saw something that made me almost collapse with relief. A thin metal fence ran along the edge of the woods ahead of me. I almost ran to it, grabbing onto the cold metal with shaking hands. I looked through it and saw the back of a row of houses. I had come out on the far side of the woods, near a different neighborhood. My knees felt like they were about to give out from the relief and fear mixing together in my chest. I climbed over the fence, scraping my leg badly as I swung my foot over the top. The pain didn't even register properly until I was standing on the grass on the other side, breathing hard. I turned back to look at the woods behind me. The trees stood silently, dark and unmoving, but I felt like they were still watching me. I could still hear faint crunching sounds somewhere deep inside them. I didn't wait to see what it was. I started walking towards the houses, limping slightly from the cut on my leg. As I walked through the backyards, heading toward the road that would take me back to my neighborhood, I felt my fear start to ease, replaced with exhaustion. When I finally reached my house, I unlocked the door with shaking hands and stepped inside. The cool, still air of my living room hit me, and I closed the door behind me, locking it quickly. I dropped my bag on the floor and sat down on the carpet, my back against the door, breathing in and out until my chest stopped hurting. That night, I lay in bed thinking about everything that had happened. I kept remembering that dragging mark on the ground, the black backpack lying abandoned, and the feeling of being followed. I didn't sleep well. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the dark shape moving through the trees beside me. The next morning, my leg ached badly from the cut, but I didn't care. I was just glad I was back home. I never went back to those woods again. Every time I drove past them, I felt my stomach twist into a knot, remembering how quiet it had been out there, how it felt like I was being hunted without ever seeing who or what was watching me. And every time I thought about that old abandoned backpack lying under the bush, I felt my chest tighten with a cold dread, wondering who had left it there and if they ever made it out. I don't really know how to start this, but I guess I'll just tell it exactly how it happened. I was on my way back home from work one evening. I work in the warehouse section of a hardware store, so my hours can change a lot. That day I had an early morning shift that turned into a full day because someone called out sick. By the time I left, it was already getting dark outside. I was tired, hungry, and my legs felt heavy from standing all day lifting boxes and stocking shelves. My car isn't the best. It's an old 2002 Honda Civic with a bunch of scratches and dents. It still runs fine though, and that's all that really matters to me. I don't care what it looks like as long as it takes me where I need to go. That day it had about a quarter tank left, so I thought I should probably fill up before going home because I had to open again early the next morning. There's a gas station that's a little out of the way from my usual route, but it's cheaper by almost 10 rupees per liter compared to the one near my apartment. I turned off the main road onto a side street that runs behind an old abandoned textile mill. This area used to be busy a long time ago when the factory was still working. Now it's mostly empty buildings and overgrown lots, and people just use it as a shortcut if they're trying to avoid traffic. It was almost fully dark by the time I reached the road behind the mill. The place always made me uneasy, especially at night. The factory is a huge brick building with boarded-up windows and broken metal fencing that sags into the weeds. I could see where rain had stained the bricks over the years, leaving dark streaks that looked like black tears running down the walls. Pieces of glass and rusted metal littered the ground, glinting faintly under my headlights. I kept driving past it, trying not to think about it too much, just focused on getting to the gas station. Then, out of nowhere, my car jerked hard to the left. My steering wheel felt loose, like it wasn't connected to anything. I pressed the brakes, and the whole car started to shudder. I managed to pull over to the side of the narrow road just before it curved around the back parking lot of the mill. I sat there for a few seconds with my heart pounding, staring at the dash lights. My check engine light was on, and so was the little tire warning symbol. I got out, and as soon as I saw the front left tire, my stomach dropped. It was completely flat, almost off the rim. I don't know what I ran over, but it shredded the rubber pretty bad. The first thing I thought was that I was lucky it didn't blow out on the main road where cars drive fast. The second thing I thought was that I was stuck here alone in the dark. I opened the trunk and pulled out the spare. It's one of those skinny little donuts that you can only drive short distances with. I grabbed the jack and started lifting the car. The air felt damp and heavy, and there was this faint smell of rot coming from somewhere nearby, probably the piles of trash and dead weeds. I could hear crickets and frogs making their noises in the distance. I tried to focus only on the task in front of me. Loosen the bolts, remove the flat, put the donut on, tighten everything, and get the hell out. When I got the flat tire off, I heard a noise coming from behind me. It was faint, almost like fabric dragging on concrete. I told myself it was probably an animal rooting through trash. I didn't look back. I just kept working, but I could feel my chest getting tight. My ears felt hot, and the hair on the back of my neck was standing up. I slid the donut onto the bolts and started screwing the nuts on by hand as fast as I could. That dragging sound came again, but this time closer. It was followed by a quiet metallic clink, like something metal brushing against the ground. I felt a chill run down my spine. I tightened the nuts with the wrench until my hands hurt, lowered the jack, and threw everything back in the trunk without arranging it properly. I just wanted to leave. I got into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and started the car. My headlights lit up the road ahead. The narrow street curved left, following the back edge of the factory fence. As I drove slowly around the bend, my lights swept across the chain-link fence and the weed-choked loading dock beyond it. That's when I saw something that made my blood run cold. Near one of the open loading bay doors stood a man. At least I think it was a man. He was tall and thin, wearing dark clothes that looked dirty or stained. His head was shaved, and he was holding something long and thin in his hand, like a crowbar or a metal pipe. He wasn't moving at all, just standing there, half turned towards the fence, staring straight at my car as I drove past. I tried to keep my eyes on the road. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I told myself he was probably just a squatter living in the abandoned building, nothing to do with me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was waiting for something. I kept driving until the gas station came into view. When I pulled in under the bright lights, I finally let out the breath I had been holding. I felt a little silly for being so scared. I filled my tank quickly and went inside to pay, then bought a packet of chips and a cola for dinner because I was too tired to cook. On my way back out to the car, I glanced down at myself and saw my hands were trembling. Driving back home, I took the longer way that didn't go past the factory. My apartment complex was quiet when I pulled in. I live on the second floor. When I got inside, I threw my keys on the table, kicked off my boots, and collapsed onto the couch. My whole body felt drained. I ate my chips without tasting them, staring at the dark TV screen in front of me. I thought about that man, the way he stood there in the shadows holding that metal bar, watching me. I wondered what he was doing. Was he just there to scavenge for metal or copper pipes to sell? Or was he waiting for someone to break down on that stretch of road? I barely slept that night. Every creak of the floor above me, Every gust of wind against the window made me flinch. I couldn't get that image out of my mind. The next day, I told my coworker about it during our lunch break. He said I was probably overreacting, that people squat there all the time, and it's just junkies or homeless guys looking for scrap metal to sell. But later that week, I saw a post online from a local news page. They found a car abandoned near the old mill. The driver's door was open, keys still in the ignition. The police were investigating it as a possible missing persons case. They didn't release any details about who it was or what happened, just that the car had been found there late at night. My chest felt heavy when I read that. I kept thinking about how flat my tire was, how shredded it had been. I wondered if it was really just bad luck. I wondered if someone put something on that road on purpose, waiting for a car to stop in the darkness. Since then, I've never driven past the mill again, even during the day. I take the longer way home no matter how tired I am. Every time I think about that night, I feel a tight knot form in my stomach. I keep imagining what would have happened if I'd taken just a little longer to change my tire. If my jack had slipped or I'd lost a bolt in the gravel, would I have seen him walking up to me with that metal bar in his hand? Would I have had time to get in and lock the doors? I don't know. And honestly, I don't ever want to find out. All I know is that there are people out there who don't need ghosts or demons to be terrifying. Sometimes the scariest thing you can see standing alone in the dark is another human being. Someone waiting for you to be alone, tired, distracted. Someone who sees your fear and doesn't care. Or worse, someone who enjoys it. That night changed something in me. Now I always check my tires before leaving work, even if I'm exhausted. I keep my phone fully charged. I keep a heavy flashlight under my seat, and I make sure all my doors are locked the second I get in. Because that night taught me a simple truth I wish I never had to learn. Real horror doesn't come with ghost stories or jump scares. It comes quietly, in an empty place, when no one else is watching. It comes when you're alone, and someone else decides they want you to stay that way forever. I never want to feel that fear again. But even now, years later, I can still see his thin shape in the shadows every time I close my eyes. And deep down, I know I wasn't just unlucky that night. I was lucky to get away. I woke up that morning feeling restless. It was my day off, and I didn't have anything planned, which bothered me. I always liked to keep myself busy because the quiet days made me think too much about life and where I was headed. So after lying in bed staring at the ceiling for almost an hour, I decided I needed to do something to get out of the house. I sat up, rubbed my face, and looked around my room. My phone was blinking with a few notifications, but nothing important. I threw on a dark blue t-shirt, old jeans, and my running shoes. I didn't even bother brushing my hair, just tied it back quickly so it wouldn't get in my face. I thought about going into town to grab breakfast, but the idea of sitting in a cafe alone with strangers around felt off today. Instead, I decided to go for a walk. There was a trail system about a 15-minute drive away that led into an area with old logging roads. I used to hike there often before work got busy. It wasn't an official park, just old roads winding through the forest, mostly flat, with some parts overgrown with grass and bushes. People went there to walk their dogs or ride dirt bikes, but it was usually quiet in the mornings. I grabbed my keys, locked up, and headed out. The drive was calm. The roads were empty, and the sun was already up, but the air was still cool. I parked my car near the gravel entrance and looked around. No other cars. Good. I preferred walking alone when it was like this. I stepped out and stretched, breathing in the clean morning air. It smelled like dirt and pine trees and dust. I started walking along the gravel road. Small rocks crunched under my shoes, and I could hear birds calling out from the trees. I kept my hands in my pockets and walked at a slow pace, feeling the sun on my face. After about 15 minutes, I turned down one of the narrower side roads. This part was less used. Grass grew down the middle of the old road, and small bushes poked out from the sides. As I walked, I looked at the way the sunlight filtered through the trees, casting thin moving shadows across the ground. It felt peaceful. After walking for a while, I stopped to drink some water. I had brought a half-full bottle from my car. I leaned against a tree and drank slowly, listening to the wind move through the leaves above. I wiped my mouth and put the bottle back in my pocket, then kept going. The road curved gently to the left, and I followed it. As I walked, I started noticing old pieces of metal in the grass. Rusted cans, bits of wire, what looked like old tools half buried under fallen leaves. It made sense. This area used to be used for logging and old equipment often got left behind. I kicked at a rusted wrench with my shoe and kept walking. Eventually, the road ended in a wide clearing. It wasn't a clean open field, more like a rough area where trees had been cut down decades ago and never regrown. Saplings grew here and there among the tall grass, and old stumps poked out like broken teeth. I walked into the clearing and stopped in the middle, just looking around. It was so quiet here, only the wind and birds. I took out my phone to check the time. Just past 9 a.m. I thought about heading back soon, but something made me want to stand there a bit longer. Then, as I turned to look back at the road I came from, I saw movement along the tree line. My eyes locked onto it instantly. About 50 meters away, just inside the trees, I saw a man standing there. He wasn't moving, just standing still, watching me. I felt my chest tighten. I couldn't see his face clearly because of the shadows, but I could tell he was wearing dark clothes. My first thought was that maybe he was a hunter or another hiker, but something felt wrong. He wasn't walking along the trail or looking around. He was standing sideways, half hidden by a tree, like he was trying to watch me without being seen. I turned away and pretended to look at my phone again. My mind was racing. I didn't want to panic or do anything sudden. I tried to think rationally. Maybe he was just resting there. Maybe he didn't even notice me. I glanced back again quickly. He hadn't moved. He was still staring in my direction. I turned and started walking back towards the road slowly. My feet felt heavy, and every part of me was telling me not to turn my back on him. But I didn't want to look scared or challenge him either. As soon as I reached the road again, I started walking faster. The gravel crunched under my feet louder with each step. I didn't want to run yet. I kept telling myself he was probably just another hiker, but my gut said otherwise. After a few minutes of walking quickly, I turned my head to look back down the road. At first, I didn't see anything. Then I saw him again. He had stepped out of the tree line and was now standing in the middle of the clearing, watching me walk away. My whole body went cold. I turned around and started walking even faster. My legs felt weak, but I forced myself to keep a strong pace. I kept glancing back every minute or so. For a while I didn't see him, and I started thinking maybe he had just been curious and left. But then, as I turned around one last time, I saw him again, this time walking along the road behind me. He wasn't running, just walking, but fast enough that I knew if I stopped he would catch up. My heart started pounding so hard I felt it in my throat. I turned around and started running. The gravel was loose under my feet, and small rocks flew out behind me as I ran. I ran for what felt like forever, the forest rushing past me on both sides. My lungs burned and my legs started to feel numb, but I didn't stop. I didn't dare look back. I just kept running. I could hear my own breath coming out in short gasps, and the blood pounding in my ears. Finally, I saw the small gate at the entrance where my car was parked. Relief flooded through me, but I didn't slow down. I ran all the way to my car, unlocked it with shaking hands, threw the door open, and slammed it behind me. I locked the doors and sat there, breathing hard, looking out the windshield. The road behind me was empty. I couldn't see him anywhere. I sat there for a few minutes, trying to calm down. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. My shirt was soaked with sweat. After a while, I started the car and pulled out of the gravel lot as fast as I could without spinning out. As I drove away, I kept checking the rearview mirror, but saw nothing. The road twisted away into the trees, and then the forest was gone. I drove all the way home with my hands clenched tight around the wheel. When I got back, I sat in my parked car for a long time, staring at the dashboard, trying to process what had happened. I kept thinking about the way he was just standing there, half hidden, watching me without moving. The way he followed me without running, just calmly walking after me like he had all the time in the world. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his shape in the shadows of my room. I kept thinking about what would have happened if I had stopped to tie my shoe, or if I had tripped on the gravel. I kept thinking about how quiet the forest was that morning, how alone I had felt, and how easy it would have been for someone like him to just wait for the right person to walk by. The next day, I reported it to the local sheriff's office. They took down the details, but didn't seem too concerned. They told me it was probably just a homeless person or a hunter passing through, but I could see in their faces they weren't going to do anything about it. After that, I never went back to those trails. I started walking in town instead, even if I hated the noise and the people around me. I never saw him again, but the memory of that day still stays with me. It wasn't that he chased me with a weapon or yelled threats. It was the way he just watched, like he was waiting for something, like he knew exactly what he was doing and had done it before. That cold patience scared me more than anything else, because it made me realize that there are people out there who don't need to threaten you openly to make you feel like prey. They just need to watch calmly with a purpose you can't see, and you will never know what they were truly planning until it's too late. Ever since then, every time I walk alone, even in busy streets or parks, I catch myself checking over my shoulder, just to be sure no one is following me quietly, calmly, patiently, waiting for their moment. Because now I know they exist. I woke up before sunrise that day, feeling a little more tired than usual. My body was heavy, but I forced myself up because I had planned to hike to the small lake near my town before the day got hot. It was early summer, and the mornings were still cool and quiet, which I liked. I packed a bottle of water, an old peanut butter sandwich from the fridge, and a small folding knife I always carried when going out alone. I didn't expect to use it, but it felt wrong to leave without it. I left my house just as the sun was starting to rise, lighting up the road in front of me in a pale yellow glow. I walked past the closed shops and quiet houses. A few stray dogs were sleeping by the roadside, ignoring me completely. It took me about 15 minutes to reach the edge of town where the paved road ended and the dirt trail started. I felt the morning air grow colder as I walked down the path. It was narrow, with bushes on both sides and some broken branches sticking out. I moved them aside with my arm as I walked. After about an hour of slow walking, I reached the small lake. It wasn't a tourist spot or anything, just a quiet place hidden by trees, with greenish water and muddy banks. I had been coming here since I was a teenager whenever I needed to think or just be away from people. I found a rock near the water and sat down. I pulled out my sandwich and ate it slowly, feeling the cold stone under me and watching tiny ripples move across the lake's surface as fish came up to bite insects. There was a fallen tree lying halfway into the water on the far side, covered with moss. The smell was strong, earthy, a mix of wet mud, rotting leaves, and still water. After I finished eating, I lay back on the rock, closing my eyes for a few minutes. Birds were calling loudly from the trees above, their sounds mixed with the rustle of leaves in the light breeze. When I opened my eyes again, the sun was up fully now. The shadows had shifted, and I could feel a slight warmth on my arms. I stood up and brushed off the dirt, and small pebbles stuck to the back of my shirt. I decided I would walk further down the trail along the lake before heading back. There was a small clearing I had seen on satellite maps, and I wanted to check it out. I followed the narrow dirt path, feeling roots under my shoes every few steps. The forest felt quiet, too quiet in some parts. Even the birds were silent in patches. I kept going, pushing away spider webs with a thin stick I had picked up from the ground. After maybe half an hour of walking, I reached the clearing. It was just a wide open space with dead grass and a few fallen logs. The ground was uneven with dry cracks near the center. I walked around slowly, scanning the ground. I saw some animal tracks in the dirt, maybe wild dogs or foxes. Near the edge of the clearing was an old metal fence, bent and rusted, disappearing into the forest in both directions. It looked like it had once been a boundary for something, maybe an old farm or property line. I went up to it and held one of the thin metal bars. It was cold even in the sun. I was about to turn back when I noticed something strange on the other side of the fence. There was a pile of empty plastic bottles, wrappers, and cans. It wasn't a normal littering spot. The trash was in a neat pile, as if someone had collected it together and left it there deliberately. I stepped over the bent fence to look closer. Some of the cans were rusty, and the wrappers looked old, half buried in dirt. But some bottles were newer. A few had labels I recognized from recent products. That meant someone had been here not long ago. I felt a shiver run down my back as I realized I wasn't as alone as I thought. I turned to leave but froze when I saw movement deeper in the trees. I stood completely still, trying to see clearly between the trunks. At first I thought it was a dog or maybe a deer, but then I saw it was a person. He was standing very still behind a tree, almost hidden, but I could see part of his shoulder and head. He wasn't looking directly at me. It was more like he was trying to hide, but hadn't moved fast enough. My heartbeat grew heavy and loud in my ears. I didn't know what to do, so I just stood there for a few seconds, trying to look calm. I turned away slowly and stepped back over the fence. I didn't run, even though every part of me wanted to. I just walked back to the trail, forcing myself to keep my pace normal until I was out of the clearing. When I got back onto the trail, I sped up. My breathing was tight, and I kept looking over my shoulder. The trees felt darker now, even though the sun was high. Every sound felt sharper. The crunch of my own feet on the dirt path, the creak of tree branches moving above me, the faint drumming of a woodpecker in the distance. I could feel sweat dripping down my back. I didn't know why the man was there. I didn't know if he had followed me or stayed hidden, but I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched the entire way back. I reached the lake again and felt a small relief seeing the water shining peacefully in the sun. I walked past it quickly and back onto the trail that would take me home. My mouth was dry and my stomach hurt from tension. I just wanted to reach town. As I walked, I kept replaying what I had seen. The neat pile of trash, the way he stood hidden but half visible, the old fence, and the feeling that I wasn't supposed to be there. My ears felt hot, and I kept scanning left and right, looking for movement in the trees. There was nothing, only silent trunks standing tall, brown and gray and unmoving. After what felt like an hour, I reached the end of the trail where it met the paved road. I stepped onto the road, and only then allowed myself to stop and breathe. My legs were shaking a little. I wiped sweat from my forehead with my shirt sleeve. Cars passed by in the distance, their sounds bringing me back to normal life. I turned back once to look at the entrance to the trail. It looked so harmless from here, just a narrow path disappearing into green trees. I walked back home quickly. When I reached, I took off my shoes at the door and sat down on the small stool in the entryway. My feet hurt and my legs felt weak. I drank almost a liter of water in one go and then lay down on the floor of my room, staring at the ceiling. My breathing slowed after a while. I felt tired, drained, like I had been running all day. Later that evening, as the sun set, I kept thinking about the man in the woods. Who he was, why he was standing there watching, why there was that neat pile of trash. I couldn't stop imagining him sitting out there alone, maybe living in the forest or hiding from something. The thought made my chest tighten with unease. I closed my curtains before it got fully dark. I didn't want to see the trees behind my house, didn't want to imagine a silhouette standing there in the dim light. That night, I lay in bed trying to sleep. My window was open a little to let the air in, but every small sound outside made me flinch. A car passing, dogs barking far away, a creak from the walls of the house cooling down after the day's heat. I rolled over and pulled my blanket up to my chin, staring at the wall. I thought about going back there to see if he was still there, but just thinking about stepping onto that trail again made my stomach clench with fear. I closed my eyes tight and forced myself to think about something else. In the morning, I woke up tired again. I got up, made tea, and sat by the window with it. The early light made everything look peaceful, as if nothing had happened yesterday. But deep down, I knew I wasn't going back there again, at least not alone. I didn't tell anyone about it. There was nothing to tell that wouldn't make me sound paranoid. I didn't even know what I saw. Just a man standing in the trees, half hidden, half visible. But that was enough. Enough to make me realize that the forest isn't always empty, and not everything hiding between the trees is an animal. The days went by, and I kept thinking about it. Sometimes, I would wake up at night and listen to the silence of my room, wondering if he was still out there, in some other part of the woods, standing behind some tree, watching whoever happened to walk by. The thought scared me more than anything else. Not ghosts or spirits or monsters. Just a real man, standing silent in the shadows, waiting for reasons I could never understand. Eventually, the memory faded, but it never truly left. Even now, whenever I go for walks along quiet trails, I keep looking at the trees, searching for any movement, any hint of someone standing there, hidden but watching. And every time I see nothing, I feel both relieved and worried. Because not seeing him doesn't mean he's not there. It only means he's hiding better than before. And I think about how easy it is for someone to disappear into the trees and wait. How easy it is to stand there, silent, watching, until the person they're waiting for walks by, never knowing they're being watched. That's what scares me the most. And that's why I never go into the woods alone anymore. I never really thought much about being alone at work. I always preferred working in empty buildings because it felt peaceful. Less chatter, fewer distractions. My job back then was as a cleaner for a medium-sized office building just outside the city. It was a bland 4-story place with white walls, gray carpets, and blue cubicle dividers, like any other office you could imagine. I worked there for almost 2 years, cleaning after everyone had gone home. My shift started at 6 p.m. and ended at midnight. Usually, I would finish most of my tasks by 10 p.m., but would stay till midnight to lock up and make sure everything was switched off. One evening in early winter, I remember it was raining heavily. The wind was loud, rattling the metal window frames. The building creaked a little in the wind, which it often did. I arrived at work, scanned my card at the glass entrance, and walked into the lobby, dripping wet from the quick sprint from the bus stop. The fluorescent lights flickered to life, humming softly. I could hear the rain hitting the large glass windows at the front of the lobby, tapping and drumming, the sound echoing faintly across the marble floor. I started my routine. First, I checked the bathrooms on the ground floor, mopped the floors, wiped down the mirrors, restocked paper towels. Then I vacuumed the lobby rug. After that, I made my way up to the second floor, wiping down desks, emptying bins, aligning chairs neatly, making sure no food wrappers were left out to attract roaches. The building was empty as usual. The only sounds were the wind outside and the occasional groaning noises the structure made as it settled in the cold. Around 8 p.m., I went up to the third floor. That floor had open cubicle spaces and 2 private glass offices at the far end. I remember cleaning one cubicle near the windows. The blinds were half open, and I could see dark clouds rolling fast across the sky, lit up by the dull orange glow of the streetlights below. As I moved to the next cubicle, I heard a loud bang from somewhere on the floor above me. It wasn't a sharp metallic sound like dropping a stapler. It was heavier, like someone had dropped a full box or slammed a door hard. I paused, straightened my back, and listened. The wind howled again, rattling the windows behind me. I waited for a few more seconds, broom in hand, heart beating a bit faster, but then shrugged it off. Maybe a maintenance guy had come in late, though I never saw them past 5 p.m. I continued sweeping around the cubicles. I finished the third floor by 8:45 p.m. As I walked toward the stairs to go up to the 4th floor, I felt my chest tighten slightly, like something was off. I ignored it. I always hated the 4th floor anyway. It felt darker, colder, even though it had the same layout as the other floors. Maybe because it was the top floor, and the roof above made it feel more exposed to the cold night air and noises of the wind. I switched on the lights as I stepped onto the 4th floor landing. The overhead fluorescence flickered rapidly before staying on, casting that pale bluish glow everywhere. There were cubicles here too, but at the far end was the big conference room with frosted glass walls and heavy wooden doors. I always cleaned it last. First, I went through each cubicle, emptying bins, collecting stray papers, and aligning chairs. I kept feeling uneasy for some reason. The rain outside was pouring down harder, and wind gusts were strong enough to make the glass panels creak. As I moved around, sweeping the carpet edges and pushing around my mop bucket, I kept glancing towards the conference room. Its doors were closed. I didn't hear anything from there, but my ears felt like they were straining, listening for something I couldn't name. At around 9:30 p.m., I finished all the cubicles. The only task left was the conference room. I walked over, pushed the heavy wooden doors open, and wheeled my mop bucket inside. The room was big, with a long, shiny table surrounded by 12 leather chairs. A large flat screen hung at one end of the room. The far side of the room had floor-to-ceiling windows covered with thick blinds. I always felt exposed in there, even though no one could see in from outside at night. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered slightly, but stayed on. I sighed and began by emptying the small bin near the door. As I bent down to pick it up, I heard something that made my chest feel tight instantly. It sounded like movement, like the quiet rustle of fabric brushing past something. I straightened up fast, staring around the room. The chairs were still, blinds unmoving. The air felt heavy, like it was pressing against my ears. I told myself maybe the building was just settling in the wind again. I started mopping the floor, working methodically around the chairs and table. My shoes squeaked slightly on the wet floor as I worked. I kept glancing at the blinds, half expecting to see a shadow move behind them. My hands felt sweaty against the mop handle. I moved around to the far end of the table, mopping near the windows, when I heard another noise that stopped me cold. It sounded like footsteps outside the conference room in the hallway, slow, heavy, and deliberate. My breathing sped up. I gripped the mop handle tighter, listening hard. The footsteps stopped right outside the conference room doors. The small hairs on my arms stood up. I didn't move for a while. My eyes stayed locked on the frosted glass doors. Through them, I could see vague shadows of the hallway light, but nothing else. The footsteps didn't come in. They didn't move away either. The silence dragged on so long that my ears started ringing. Finally, I forced myself to move. I squeezed out the mop, finished the section I was doing, and quickly wheeled the bucket toward the doors. My chest was pounding, so hard I felt dizzy. I opened the doors slowly, half expecting someone to be standing there staring at me. But the hallway was empty. The cubicles were empty too. I looked left and right, down the silent, fluorescent-lit hallway, feeling sweat dripping down my back despite the cold air. I wheeled the bucket out and closed the conference room doors behind me. I felt a strong urge to leave immediately, but I still had to put away the supplies in the janitor closet on the 3rd floor before I could lock up. I walked briskly to the stairwell, my wet shoes squeaking on the linoleum floor. As I reached the stairwell door, I heard another noise from down the hallway behind me. This time it wasn't footsteps. It was a scraping sound, like heavy wood dragging across carpet. I didn't turn around. My eyes were starting to tear up from holding my breath so much. I pushed open the stairwell door and rushed down the stairs, almost tripping over my mop bucket. My hands shook as I gripped the railings. On the 3rd floor, I parked my mop bucket inside the janitor closet and switched off the lights. I locked the closet and headed down to the 2nd floor, switching off lights as I went. My chest was still tight, my shoulders hunched up like I was bracing for something to grab me. I didn't hear anything else, but that was somehow worse. By the time I reached the ground floor, my shirt was damp with sweat despite the cold air inside the building. I walked through the lobby, switching off the last set of lights. The glass entrance doors showed the black night outside, streaked with rain. As I reached for the door handle to leave, I hesitated and looked back through the dim lobby. Everything was dark, empty, silent. But I felt eyes on me. My skin prickled all over. I pushed the door open and stepped out into the cold rain, pulling it shut behind me with shaking hands. The rain soaked me immediately, but I didn't care. I walked fast towards the bus stop down the road, not daring to look back at the silent, dark building behind me. My shoes squelched in the puddles, and my breath came out in cloudy bursts. I kept my eyes ahead until I reached the bus shelter. The street was empty except for the orange streetlights reflecting on the wet asphalt. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. When I got home that night, I went straight to my bedroom, peeled off my wet clothes, and sat on the bed for a long time, staring at the floor. I couldn't get the sound of those footsteps out of my head. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Like someone who knew exactly where I was and wasn't in a hurry. I thought about quitting the next day, but I needed the job. So, I kept going back, night after night, but I never felt at ease again. Every creak, every gust of wind, every flicker of the lights made my chest tighten. About 3 weeks later, I found out what it was. The building manager called all cleaning staff for a quick meeting before shift one evening. He looked tired and tense as he told us the news. Apparently, security footage from the last few months had shown a homeless man sneaking into the building at night. He would slip in during the day when the front desk was busy and hide in the upper floors, sleeping in empty conference rooms or storage closets. He was mentally unstable, and when they finally caught him, he was carrying a large piece of metal pipe with him for protection. He never attacked anyone, but he had been walking the halls at night, checking doors, moving things around. Police took him away, and they changed the locks and increased security after that. Hearing that made my stomach turn. All those nights I thought I was alone, hearing footsteps, feeling watched, it was him. He could have been hiding behind any cubicle partition as I cleaned. He could have been watching me mop that conference room. He could have done anything he wanted in that silent building where no one would hear a scream over the howling winter wind. After that, I never worked alone again. I found another job in a factory with day shifts. I still clean, but now it's with dozens of people around me at all times. And every time I hear footsteps behind me at work, my chest still tightens until I see who it is, because I know how it feels to think you're alone when you're really not. I woke up that morning feeling restless. It was my day off, and I didn't have anything planned, which bothered me. I always liked to keep myself busy because the quiet days made me think too much about life and where I was headed. So after lying in bed staring at the ceiling for almost an hour, I decided I needed to do something to get out of the house. I sat up, rubbed my face, and looked around my room. My phone was blinking with a few notifications, but nothing important. I threw on a dark blue t-shirt, old jeans, and my running shoes. I didn't even bother brushing my hair, just tied it back quickly so it wouldn't get in my face. I thought about going into town to grab breakfast, but the idea of sitting in a cafe alone with strangers around felt off today. Instead, I decided to go for a walk. There was a trail system about a 15-minute drive away that led into an area with old logging roads. I used to hike there often before work got busy. It wasn't an official park, just old roads winding through the forest, mostly flat, with some parts overgrown with grass and bushes. People went there to walk their dogs or ride dirt bikes, but it was usually quiet in the mornings. I grabbed my keys, locked up, and headed out. The drive was calm. The roads were empty, and the sun was already up, but the air was still cool. I parked my car near the gravel entrance and looked around. No other cars. Good. I preferred walking alone when it was like this. I stepped out and stretched, breathing in the clean morning air. It smelled like dirt and pine trees and dust. I started walking along the gravel road. Small rocks crunched under my shoes, and I could hear birds calling out from the trees. I kept my hands in my pockets and walked at a slow pace, feeling the sun on my face. After about 15 minutes, I turned down one of the narrower side roads. This part was less used. Grass grew down the middle of the old road, and small bushes poked out from the sides. As I walked, I looked at the way the sunlight filtered through the trees, casting thin moving shadows across the ground. It felt peaceful. After walking for a while, I stopped to drink some water. I had brought a half-full bottle from my car. I leaned against a tree and drank slowly, listening to the wind move through the leaves above. I wiped my mouth and put the bottle back in my pocket, then kept going. The road curved gently to the left, and I followed it. As I walked, I started noticing old pieces of metal in the grass. Rusted cans, bits of wire, what looked like old tools half buried under fallen leaves. It made sense. This area used to be used for logging, and old equipment often got left behind. I kicked at a rusted wrench with my shoe and kept walking. Eventually, the road ended in a wide clearing. It wasn't a clean open field, more like a rough area where trees had been cut down decades ago and never regrown. Saplings grew here and there among the tall grass, and old stumps poked out like broken teeth. I walked into the clearing and stopped in the middle, just looking around. It was so quiet here, only the wind and birds. I took out my phone to check the time. Just past 9 a.m. I thought about heading back soon, but something made me want to stand there a bit longer. Then, as I turned to look back at the road I came from, I saw movement along the tree line. My eyes locked onto it instantly. About 50 meters away, just inside the trees, I saw a man standing there. He wasn't moving, just standing still, watching me. I felt my chest tighten. I couldn't see his face clearly because of the shadows, but I could tell he was wearing dark clothes. My first thought was that maybe he was a hunter or another hiker, but something felt wrong. He wasn't walking along the trail or looking around. He was standing sideways, half hidden by a tree, like he was trying to watch me without being seen. I turned away and pretended to look at my phone again. My mind was racing. I didn't want to panic or do anything sudden. I tried to think rationally. Maybe he was just resting there. Maybe he didn't even notice me. I glanced back again quickly. He hadn't moved. He was still staring in my direction. I turned and started walking back towards the road slowly. My feet felt heavy, and every part of me was telling me not to turn my back on him. But I didn't want to look scared or challenge him either. As soon as I reached the road again, I started walking faster. The gravel crunched under my feet louder with each step. I didn't want to run yet. I kept telling myself he was probably just another hiker, but my gut said otherwise. After a few minutes of walking quickly, I turned my head to look back down the road. At first, I didn't see anything. Then I saw him again. He had stepped out of the tree line and was now standing in the middle of the clearing, watching me walk away. My whole body went cold. I turned around and started walking even faster. My legs felt weak, but I forced myself to keep a strong pace. I kept glancing back every minute or so. For a while I didn't see him, and I started thinking maybe he had just been curious and left. But then, as I turned around one last time, I saw him again, this time walking along the road behind me. He wasn't running, just walking, but fast enough that I knew if I stopped he would catch up. My heart started pounding, so hard I felt it in my throat. I turned around and started running. The gravel was loose under my feet, and small rocks flew out behind me as I ran. I ran for what felt like forever, the forest rushing past me on both sides. My lungs burned and my legs started to feel numb, but I didn't stop. I didn't dare look back. I just kept running. I could hear my own breath coming out in short gasps, and the blood pounding in my ears. Finally, I saw the small gate at the entrance where my car was parked. Relief flooded through me, but I didn't slow down. I ran all the way to my car, unlocked it with shaking hands, threw the door open, and slammed it behind me. I locked the doors and sat there, breathing hard, looking out the windshield. The road behind me was empty. I couldn't see him anywhere. I sat there for a few minutes, trying to calm down. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. My shirt was soaked with sweat. After a while, I started the car and pulled out of the gravel lot as fast as I could without spinning out. As I drove away, I kept checking the rearview mirror, but saw nothing. The road twisted away into the trees, and then the forest was gone. I drove all the way home with my hands clenched tight around the wheel. When I got back, I sat in my parked car for a long time, staring at the dashboard, trying to process what had happened. I kept thinking about the way he was just standing there, half hidden, watching me without moving. The way he followed me without running, just calmly walking after me like he had all the time in the world. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his shape in the shadows of my room. I kept thinking about what would have happened if I had stopped to tie my shoe, or if I had tripped on the gravel. I kept thinking about how quiet the forest was that morning, how alone I had felt, and how easy it would have been for someone like him to just wait for the right person to walk by. The next day, I reported it to the local sheriff's office. They took down the details, but didn't seem too concerned. They told me it was probably just a homeless person or a hunter passing through, but I could see in their faces they weren't going to do anything about it. After that, I never went back to those trails. I started walking in town instead, even if I hated the noise and the people around me. I never saw him again, but the memory of that day still stays with me. It wasn't that he chased me with a weapon or yelled threats. It was the way he just watched, like he was waiting for something, like he knew exactly what he was doing and had done it before. That cold patience scared me more than anything else, because it made me realize that there are people out there who don't need to threaten you openly to make you feel like prey. They just need to watch, calmly, with a purpose you can't see, and you will never know what they were truly planning until it's too late. Ever since then, every time I walk alone, even in busy streets or parks, I catch myself checking over my shoulder, just to be sure no one is following me quietly, calmly, patiently, waiting for their moment. Because now I know they exist. I woke up before my alarm today. The sun wasn't even out yet. I could see the sky through the small window in my room. It was still dark, but had that early morning bluish tint. My eyes felt heavy, and my body felt sore from the work I had done yesterday. I just lay there on my thin mattress for a while, feeling the silence of the room. I could hear a cricket outside somewhere, chirping alone in the cool dawn. I pulled myself up and rubbed my face. My back cracked a little as I stretched. The old wooden bed creaked under my weight. I stood up slowly and felt the cold cement floor under my bare feet. I walked to the small washroom attached to my room. The tiles were chipped and cold. The bulb flickered once before staying on. I splashed some water on my face, looking at myself in the mirror. My eyes looked dull. My hair was a mess. I just stared for a while, thinking about nothing. After brushing my teeth and washing my face properly, I walked out of my room. The hallway was silent. I could hear the ticking of the clock in the living room. Everyone was still asleep. I didn't switch on any lights. I liked the darkness. It felt calm. I walked to the kitchen and drank some water. I felt it go down my throat, cold and clear. I stood there for a minute, just looking at the silent kitchen. The small stove, the fridge humming, the countertop with stains from teacups and plates. Everything was silent and still. I decided to go for a walk. I put on my shoes and stepped out the back door. The air felt cold on my skin, and I could see the mist hanging in the fields behind my house. I started walking down the small dirt path that led to the farms nearby. The path was muddy from the rain 2 days ago, but now it was just damp. My shoes left clear prints behind me. I could hear birds starting to chirp in the trees far away, waking up with the dawn. I kept walking down the path, feeling my legs warm up with each step. I walked past the tall grass that grew on either side, wet with dew. The sky was turning lighter now, a pale blue with hints of yellow. I could smell the wet earth, that strong, fresh smell. I liked it. I took deep breaths as I walked. I could see my own breath in the cold air. After about 20 minutes of walking, I reached the edge of the farmland. There was a narrow canal there with still, dark water. Sometimes I saw frogs sitting there or dragonflies hovering above the water. I stopped there for a while and sat down on a broken concrete block. I watched the water. It was silent and unmoving. I could see fallen leaves floating on it, barely drifting. I just sat there, staring at the water, feeling my body relax. I don't know how long I sat there, but the sky turned brighter. The mist started to lift. I decided to keep walking. I walked along the canal. The path was narrow, with thorn bushes scratching at my legs sometimes. I walked slowly, looking at the water, at the grass, at the small purple flowers growing near the banks. Then I saw something in the distance. It was a shape lying near the water, half in the grass, half on the path. I stopped walking. I squinted my eyes, trying to make out what it was. As I walked closer, I felt my stomach tighten. It was a dog, a brown dog, lying on its side. Its fur was wet and matted. Flies were buzzing around its head. I could see its ribs poking out. I stopped a few feet away from it. The smell hit me then. That rotting, sweet smell. I covered my nose and took a step back. The dog was dead. Its eyes were open, staring at nothing. Its tongue was hanging out of its mouth. I could see its teeth, yellow and broken. I felt sick. I turned away and took a few steps back. I didn't want to look at it anymore. I started walking back the way I came, my chest feeling tight, my stomach churning from the smell. I felt goosebumps all over my arms. I kept walking quickly, not looking back. The mist was almost gone now, and the sun was starting to rise. The sky was orange and pink, but I didn't feel calm anymore. My chest still felt tight. I walked past the broken concrete block where I had sat earlier. I didn't stop this time. I just kept walking. I could hear my shoes hitting the ground fast, crunching small pebbles under them. When I finally reached home, I felt like I could breathe properly again. I walked into the house, took off my shoes, and went to the washroom. I washed my face again, scrubbing hard. I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes looked wide and a little red. I just stood there, breathing hard. After a while, I went to my room and lay down on the bed. I pulled the thin blanket over myself. I could hear the sounds of people waking up now. Cups clinking in the kitchen, footsteps in the hallway, doors opening and closing. But I just lay there, staring at the ceiling. I closed my eyes, but every time I did, I saw that dog. The way its ribs stuck out, the way its eyes were open and empty. I turned on my side and pulled the blanket over my head. I could still smell it in my mind. That rotting smell. I felt my stomach twist again. I didn't want to get up. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I just wanted to forget what I saw. But I couldn't. Later that day, I forced myself to get up. I went to the kitchen to make tea. My hands were shaking a little as I poured the hot water into the cup. I sat by the small window, sipping it slowly, feeling the steam on my face. I tried to think about other things. The work I had to do today, the bills I had to pay, the things I needed to buy from the market. But my mind kept drifting back to that dog. I kept seeing its ribs, its yellow teeth, its empty eyes. I wondered how long it had been lying there. I wondered if it had died alone, if it had been in pain. My stomach twisted again. I felt a deep sadness in my chest. I didn't even like dogs much, but seeing it like that made me feel something I couldn't explain. It made me feel scared too. I don't know why. Maybe because it reminded me of death, of how quiet and lonely it looked, of how one day I would also die, and maybe I would also be lying alone somewhere with no one knowing or caring. The rest of the day I stayed quiet. I did my work, cooked my food, cleaned my room, but I did everything slowly, like my body was heavy, like something was pressing down on my chest. I didn't talk to anyone more than I had to. I just nodded or shook my head if someone said something to me. My mind was somewhere else. At night, I lay on my bed, staring at the dark ceiling. I could hear dogs barking in the distance, their voices echoing through the silent streets. I closed my eyes and saw that dog again, lying still, eyes open, ribs poking out. I pulled the blanket over myself tightly. I tried to think of something else, but nothing helped. I don't know when I fell asleep, but I woke up before dawn again the next day. The sky was dark blue, just like yesterday. I sat up slowly, feeling the heaviness in my chest again. I stood up and walked to the washroom, switched on the flickering bulb, and looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes looked dull. My hair was messy. My face looked tired. I splashed water on my face, wiped it with a towel, and just stood there for a while, listening to the silence of the house. I didn't feel like going for a walk today. I didn't want to see anything lying on the path again. I didn't want to feel that smell in my nose again. I just stood there in the bathroom, staring at myself, feeling my heart beating in my chest. It felt heavy and slow. I walked back to my room and sat down on the bed. I looked out the window at the sky turning lighter. Birds were starting to chirp. The world was waking up again. But I felt tired. I felt like sleeping again, even though I had just woken up. I lay down on the bed, pulling the blanket over myself, closing my eyes tightly. I didn't want to see anything today. I didn't want to feel anything today. I just wanted the day to pass. And that's how it was for the next few days. I woke up early, felt the heaviness in my chest, did my work slowly, spoke only when I had to, and spent the evenings sitting alone by the window, staring at nothing. I didn't go for walks anymore. I didn't want to see what else was out there. I just wanted to stay inside, where it was silent and safe. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that dog. Its empty eyes staring at me, its ribs poking out, the flies buzzing around its head. And I felt that tightness in my chest again, that heaviness that didn't leave. I woke up that morning feeling restless for no real reason. The sun hadn't even come up yet, and the air in my room felt heavy. I stared at the ceiling for a while before deciding I might as well start my day early. I slipped out of bed, feeling the cold floor under my feet, and walked to the window. Everything outside was dark and silent, except for a few faint cricket sounds coming from somewhere down the street. I made myself some coffee and sat by the window, looking at the streetlights flickering a bit in the early morning breeze. I always liked the quiet of the mornings before people started heading out for work, before cars started rushing down the road, before the whole city woke up. But that morning felt off, like something was weighing on my chest, and I couldn't tell what it was. By the time the sun started to rise, I had already changed into my joggers and hoodie. I decided to go for a run, even though my body didn't feel like it. I thought maybe some fresh air would clear up the weird feeling inside me. I stepped out and closed the door quietly behind me, locking it twice like I always did. The morning air felt cold against my face as I started jogging down the empty street. I passed by the row of houses that all looked the same with their lawns and mailboxes lined up perfectly. I turned left towards the small park that had a track running around it. The streetlights were still on, and the grass was wet with dew. I could hear birds starting to wake up and sing softly from the trees. It should have felt peaceful, but it didn't. I kept glancing behind me for no reason at all. I ran 3 laps around the park before heading towards the old industrial area on the other side of town. I didn't usually go there, but that morning I felt like I needed to get far away from everything. I passed by closed shops with their shutters down and windows covered in dust. There were old factories there that hadn't been used in years. Most people avoided going there, especially in the mornings, because there was nothing to see except broken windows, rusted fences, and piles of trash where people dumped stuff at night. I stopped near an abandoned warehouse to catch my breath. My chest burned from the cold air. The warehouse was huge, its walls covered in graffiti, the windows broken and dark. I leaned against a metal pole, feeling sweat drip down my neck despite the chill. The place smelled like old metal and rotten wood. I looked around and realized I had never actually come here alone. Usually if I was near this place, I was with friends riding bikes when we were kids. But now I was alone and grown up, and the place felt even bigger and emptier. I don't know why I decided to walk around the warehouse instead of heading back home. My legs felt heavy as I walked along the side of the building, stepping over broken glass and pieces of wood. The ground was wet and muddy in some places. I could hear dripping water somewhere inside the building through a broken window. As I kept walking, I saw an old door half open. It was metal with rust along the edges, and there was a long scratch mark near the handle, like someone had tried to pry it open at some point. I stood there looking at it, feeling that weird heaviness in my chest again, but curiosity won over caution. I pushed the door open slowly, and it made a creaking sound that echoed inside the empty building. The smell hit me first. Dampness, mold, and old oil. The floor inside was covered in dirt and patches of weeds growing through the cracks. Light came in through the broken windows in thin beams, lighting up dust floating in the air. I walked in further, my footsteps echoing softly. There were old machines and shelves with broken boxes. Some pigeons fluttered up into the rafters, and their sudden movement made me flinch. I could hear my own breathing louder than anything else. I walked towards the back where there were some offices. Their glass walls were broken, and papers were scattered everywhere, yellowed with age. I stepped over a fallen chair and looked around. There was an old coat hanging on a rusted hook near the back door. It looked stiff and dusty, like it hadn't been touched in years. I stood there staring at it for a while, feeling an uneasy chill run down my back. It was like stepping into a place where time had stopped completely. I walked out of the office and back into the main factory area. There was an old metal staircase leading up to a platform that ran along the side wall. I grabbed the railing and started climbing. The metal felt cold and sticky from rust. Every step I took made the staircase creak and shake slightly under my weight. When I reached the top, I looked down at the whole factory floor. It was huge and empty except for the broken machines and old crates scattered around. As I was standing there catching my breath, I heard a noise that made my blood run cold. It was like a soft shuffle, almost like someone dragging their feet across the concrete floor below. I froze completely, holding my breath, and listened. The sound came again, slow and heavy, moving along the floor near the back where the offices were. My heart started racing, and I felt sweat forming on my forehead despite the cold air. I crouched down low, gripping the rusted railing, trying to see what was making the noise. I couldn't see clearly from where I was. The sun was rising, and light was coming in through the broken windows, but shadows covered most of the factory floor. I stayed there, not moving, my eyes fixed on the dark area near the offices. After what felt like forever, I saw movement. A person slowly walked out from behind a broken machine. He was wearing dark clothes, and his face was hidden by a hood pulled over his head. He walked with a limp, dragging one foot slightly behind him. Every step he took echoed through the empty building. He stopped near the staircase I had just climbed. My heart was beating so hard I felt sick. He stood there for a moment, looking around slowly. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out something shiny. It was a small metal object. He held it in his hand, looking at it closely, then put it back into his pocket. He turned his head slowly towards the staircase and tilted it slightly, like he was listening for something. I pressed my back against the platform, trying to be as quiet as possible. He stood there for a long time, just listening. I could hear my heart thudding in my chest, and I was sure he could hear it too. Suddenly he turned and walked away towards the other side of the factory floor. I stayed crouched down, not daring to move. I could hear him shuffling around, opening boxes, moving metal parts. Every sound echoed loudly. It felt like the entire building was holding its breath with me. I stayed hidden on the platform for almost an hour. My legs were shaking from staying crouched so long, but I was too scared to move. Finally, I heard the sound of the metal door opening and closing. I waited another 10 minutes before I stood up slowly and looked around. The factory floor was empty again. There was no sign of him anywhere. I climbed down the staircase slowly, holding the railing tightly because my legs felt numb. I walked as quietly as I could across the concrete floor, stepping over broken parts and avoiding anything that might make a noise. When I reached the door, I pushed it open just enough to peek outside. The street was empty. The sky was bright now with the morning sun shining down, making the broken glass sparkle on the ground. I stepped out and walked away from the building as fast as I could without running. My hands were shaking, and my chest hurt from holding my breath so long. When I reached the main road, I finally stopped and looked back. The warehouse stood there silent and empty, the rusted door hanging slightly open. It looked harmless in the daylight, like just another old abandoned building. But I knew what I had seen. I walked back home with my head down, feeling every crack and stone under my shoes. I kept looking behind me every few minutes, but there was no one there. When I reached my house, I unlocked the door and stepped inside, locking it twice behind me. I walked straight to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were still trembling, so much that I spilled some on the counter. I sat down at the table and stared at the glass in front of me. My chest still felt heavy, but now it was mixed with relief that I was home and safe. I thought about the man in the warehouse, about how he didn't look like he belonged there, about the way he stood listening for sounds. I didn't know who he was or what he was doing there, but I knew I never wanted to find out. Later that day, I went online and searched for news about the warehouse or that area, but there was nothing. No crimes reported, no arrests, nothing at all. It was like he didn't exist. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed with the lights on, listening to every sound outside my window, every car that passed by, every dog that barked in the distance. The next morning I decided I would never go near that place again. I went for my run but stayed close to the neighborhood, running around the park instead. Every time I passed by a tree or bush, I felt like someone was watching me. That feeling stayed with me for days, even weeks. I kept remembering how quietly he moved, how he stood there listening, how he pulled out that small shiny object from his pocket. I didn't know what it was, but something told me it wasn't anything good. I never told anyone about what I saw. Even now, when I think about it, my chest tightens up. It was just a normal morning, just a normal run, but it changed the way I felt about going out alone. That heavy feeling I woke up with that day never really left me. Sometimes you don't need to see anything supernatural to feel real fear. Sometimes just knowing that someone was there, someone you weren't supposed to see, someone who might have been waiting for the wrong person to walk in. That's enough to keep you awake at night, staring at your locked door until the sun comes up again. I woke up early that day. The sun was just coming up, and the sky had that dull blue color before the heat settled in. I was planning to spend the day out on the river. I had packed up my fishing gear the night before, set my small aluminum boat on the trailer, checked the motor, fuel tank, and my tackle box. It was Saturday, and I wanted a full day away from people. The week had been long, and my mind felt heavy. I just needed to sit by myself, hear the soft splash of water against the hull, and breathe. By 6 a.m., I was already at the boat ramp. There was no one else around. The water was still and dark, reflecting the early morning trees in perfect shapes. I backed my trailer down, unstrapped the boat, and slid it into the water. I parked my truck up the dirt lot and walked back down. As soon as I pushed away from shore, I felt better. The small outboard motor hummed lightly behind me as I cruised up the river. There was a small bend I liked to go past where the trees grew thick over the water, shading everything beneath. It felt like a hidden tunnel sometimes, the way the branches met overhead. I killed the motor when I reached my spot, letting the boat drift a little until it settled against the bank. I tied it off to a tree root sticking out, set up my rod, and cast my line. It landed with a plop and little ripples spread out, disappearing under the low shadows of the branches. I leaned back, resting my elbows on the sides of the boat, listening to birds calling each other across the water. Everything smelled damp and earthy. Fish jumped now and then, small splashes echoing across the wide river. I sat there for hours. The sun rose up and burned off the morning chill. My bottle of water felt warm by noon. I kept casting and reeling, moving spots around the bend. I caught 2 medium bass and put them in the small cooler I had with ice. Around 2 in the afternoon, I started feeling hungry. I opened up the bag of sandwiches I had packed, simple peanut butter ones, and ate slowly, enjoying the quiet. That quiet broke around 3. I had just cast my line again when I heard a rustle in the bushes up the bank. I looked over my shoulder. The bank was steep here, with exposed tree roots and dark earth showing where the water had washed away the mud over time. I thought it might be a deer or maybe a raccoon. I didn't pay much attention to it at first. But then I heard the sound again. Louder. Not like an animal stepping softly through leaves. It sounded like someone slipping or tripping, like shoes scraping dirt and twigs cracking under hard weight. I felt a cold tightness in my stomach. I kept my rod still and stared at the bank. The branches were thick and drooping. I couldn't see anything up there. The sound stopped. The air felt hot and heavy. I tried to breathe slow and calm myself down, telling myself it was just a deer. After a minute, I went back to my fishing, though I kept glancing up at the bank now and then. The feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the line and the quiet gurgle of water against the boat. Half an hour passed with no more sounds. I started to relax again, telling myself I was overthinking things. I decided to move downstream a bit, closer to where the river widened before heading back towards the boat ramp later in the evening. I untied the rope and started the motor. As I pulled away from the bank, I looked back one last time, and thought I saw something dark moving between the trees. My heart beat faster for a second, but I couldn't make out any shape clearly. The shadows were long now, with the sun dipping behind the trees. I shook my head and turned away, telling myself it was nothing. I drifted down about half a mile and anchored near some fallen logs sticking out of the water. I cast again and again, catching a small bluegill and tossing it back. The feeling of being watched still itched at the back of my mind. The shadows deepened around me. The river turned a dark greenish black, only reflecting the orange patches of evening sky between the tree branches. The air smelled thicker now, mixed with rotting leaves and mud. Around 6, I decided to call it a day. I packed up my rods and tackle, wiped my hands on my jeans, and sat there for a minute just listening to the frogs starting up along the banks. The motor took a few pulls to start, but it finally kicked in. I turned the boat around and started heading back upriver, keeping near the center where the current was smoothest. About halfway back, I saw something up ahead in the water. It looked like a fallen branch at first, but as I got closer, I realized it was bigger than that. It was almost as wide as the boat, dark and half submerged. I slowed down and drifted closer. My heart thudded as I realized it was an old canoe, turned upside down, wedged against a submerged log. It looked like it had been there for a long time. The wood was dark and rotting. One end was cracked open. Thick green moss grew along the sides. I steered around it carefully. As I passed, I glanced down into the water, trying to see if there was anything trapped underneath it. The water was too dark. It felt eerie seeing that old canoe sitting there rotting away, hidden from the world. I wondered who it had belonged to, if they had lost it in a storm or just abandoned it. The thought gave me goosebumps. I sped up a little after that, wanting to get back to the ramp before it got too dark. When I reached the ramp, the sun had fully set behind the trees. The sky was a mix of dull purples and grays. Crickets were chirping all around. I backed up the trailer, pulled the boat in, strapped it down, and walked around checking everything twice. I felt jumpy. The feeling of being watched still hadn't left. As I drove out of the lot, my headlights swept across the empty dirt area and into the thick tree line. For a brief moment, I thought I saw something standing between two trees, tall and human-shaped. I blinked and it was gone. My chest tightened. I kept driving, telling myself it was a trick of light and shadow. On the road back, I kept checking my rearview mirror. Every time my eyes met the empty road behind me, a chill ran through my shoulders. By the time I got home, it was past 8. I unhooked the boat and parked it behind the garage, went inside, and locked all the doors. I sat down on my couch, turned on the small lamp beside it, and stared at the blank TV screen. My hands felt cold, even though it was still warm outside. I thought about the sounds on the bank, about that old canoe half sunk in the river, about the shape I thought I saw between the trees at the boat ramp. My mind kept playing tricks on me, imagining someone out there right now, standing in the dark woods, staring at my house. I tried to shake it off. I stood up, made myself some instant noodles, and ate quickly, barely tasting anything. When I went to bed that night, I locked my bedroom window and pulled the curtains shut tight. I lay there in the dark, listening to the ceiling fan click with every slow turn. My ears felt sharp, picking up every sound outside. The wind in the trees, a dog barking far away, a car passing down the road. My eyes kept flicking towards the window, expecting to see a face staring back at me through the glass. I didn't sleep much. When the sun finally rose the next morning, I got up feeling exhausted. I made coffee and sat on the back steps looking out at the boat. The morning was quiet and bright. Birds chirped. Everything looked normal again. I tried to tell myself there was nothing to be afraid of, that I had just let the isolation of the river and the shadows of the woods get to me. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been out there watching me all along. And maybe they still were, somewhere in those trees, waiting for me to come back. That thought sat heavy in my chest as I drank my coffee. I told myself I wouldn't go back to that bend in the river for a while. Just the idea of drifting under those thick branches again, with no one else around for miles, made my hands sweat. I went inside, washed my mug, and tried to focus on the rest of my day. But that heavy feeling never really went away. Even now, whenever I think about that quiet bend of the river, all I feel is a cold emptiness in my chest, as if something is still waiting there, hidden under the shadows, watching for anyone who drifts too close. I woke up before the sun even started to rise. My alarm went off at 4:30 in the morning, and it took me a few minutes just to remember why I had set it that early. Then it came back to me. I had promised myself I would go for a run before work today. I didn't feel like it, not at all. I lay in bed for another 5 minutes, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence in my small apartment. I could hear the low hum of the fridge from the kitchen. The air felt cool on my face. I wanted to just roll over and sleep for another hour, but I knew if I did that, I would feel worse about myself the rest of the day. I forced myself up. My knees cracked as I sat up on the edge of the bed. I rubbed my face hard with both hands, trying to wake up properly. My room was dark except for the faint orange glow from the streetlights outside coming through the blinds. I could see the pile of clothes on the chair across the room. I got up, put on my running shorts and my old gray t-shirt, tied my running shoes, grabbed my phone and headphones, and left my apartment quietly. The hallway was silent. Nobody else was up at that time. It felt strange to be leaving for a run when everyone else was sleeping. Outside, the air felt cooler than I expected. I could feel the breeze on my arms. The street was completely empty. There were no cars passing by, just the dim yellow lights along the sidewalks. I did some light stretching near the curb, feeling my hamstrings tighten as I bent forward. I put in my headphones, but didn't play any music yet. I just wanted to hear the quiet of the morning for a few minutes. I started running at a slow pace. My shoes made soft thuds on the concrete. I could hear my breathing louder than anything else. I ran past the closed shops with their metal shutters pulled down. I passed a small bus stop with an empty bench. The only other person I saw was an old man walking his dog far ahead of me. I kept running down the street, past the bank building and the pharmacy. After about 15 minutes, my body started warming up properly, and I picked up the pace. I decided I would run all the way down to the river trail. I rarely ran there alone, but it felt like a good idea today. The sun was just starting to bring a faint gray light to the sky. I reached the turn that led to the river trail. There was a small path that went down a slight slope with tall bushes on each side. The river trail was about 5 miles long, stretching alongside the slow, muddy river that cut through the edge of town. It was surrounded by trees, bushes, and patches of wild grass. It was used by cyclists, walkers, and runners during the day, but at this hour it was empty. I slowed down for a moment and took a few deep breaths before entering the trail. It felt colder there. The trees blocked what little light was coming in from the sky. I could hear the river flowing slowly on my right side. The smell of wet dirt and grass was strong in the cold morning air. I kept running at a steady pace. My shoes crunched over small pieces of gravel scattered along the path. I could hear birds waking up and making short chirping sounds from somewhere high up in the trees. After a while, I reached a section of the trail that was completely covered by tree branches hanging low overhead. It felt darker there. The air felt damp, and I noticed my arms had goosebumps. I checked behind me once, just out of habit. No one was there. The trail was empty in both directions. I kept running, trying to focus on my breathing, trying to ignore how dark it felt under those trees. About half a mile later, I saw something ahead on the trail. At first, I thought it was just a fallen branch. As I got closer, I realized it was a bicycle lying on its side, blocking half of the trail. It was an old mountain bike. The tires were muddy, and the chain looked rusted. I slowed down and stopped a few feet away from it. I looked around to see if there was anyone nearby. I listened carefully. All I could hear was the river and the birds. I scanned the bushes and the path ahead, but didn't see anyone. I felt uneasy. I walked around the bike and kept running, but now my senses felt more awake. I kept glancing to my sides, and behind me every now and then. The sky was getting lighter, but the trail still felt dark under the trees. My breathing felt heavier. I kept running for another 15 minutes until I reached a small wooden bench by the river. I stopped there, bent down with my hands on my knees, breathing hard. My heart was beating faster than it should have been. I felt a tightness in my chest that wasn't just from running. After a few minutes, I stood up straight and took a sip of water from my bottle. I looked around again. The trail was still empty. I turned to head back the way I came. As I ran back, I felt that uneasy feeling grow stronger. My ears felt sensitive to every small sound. Birds flying out of trees, branches creaking, the sound of water against rocks. I was about 5 minutes away from where I had seen the bike when I noticed something in the bushes on my left. At first, it was just movement. I kept running, trying not to look too obviously, but I could feel my skin crawl. Then I heard it, the sound of footsteps on dry leaves, matching my pace. I tried to convince myself it was just an animal, maybe a deer or a dog, but the footsteps sounded too heavy and too controlled. I sped up, and the footsteps sped up too. I felt panic rising in my chest. My breathing turned into shallow gasps. I could hear the footsteps coming closer to the trail. I wanted to look, but I was too scared to turn my head fully. I kept running faster and faster, my feet slamming on the concrete path. Then I saw the bike again, lying there just like before. As I ran past it, I finally turned my head to look behind me. For a second, I didn't see anything. Then I saw a person step out onto the trail from the bushes. He was wearing dark clothes. He was thin, tall, and his face was hidden under a dark hood. He wasn't running. He just stood there, watching me run away. My stomach twisted with fear. I kept running without looking back again. My chest burned. My legs felt like they would collapse any moment, but I kept pushing myself. I just needed to get back to the main road. I kept repeating that in my head over and over. The trail felt like it was stretching on forever. Finally, I saw the turn up ahead that led back up to the street. I didn't stop running until I reached the sidewalk. I turned around and looked back down the trail. There was no one there. The path was empty. The sun had started rising properly now. Everything looked calm and normal under the morning light. I stood there, breathing hard, trying to calm myself down. My heart felt like it was punching my chest from the inside. I checked the time on my phone. It was only 6:15 in the morning. I had run for almost 2 hours. I walked slowly back home, looking over my shoulder every few seconds. Every person I passed on the way back looked normal, going about their morning routines. Cars were starting to fill the streets. Shops were opening. But I couldn't shake off the feeling of that man standing there in the middle of the trail, hidden under his hood, just watching me. When I got home, I locked the door behind me and sat down on the floor of my kitchen, still in my running clothes. I felt my whole body shaking with leftover adrenaline. I thought about calling the police, telling them someone was lurking on the trail, but I didn't even know what I would say. He didn't do anything, I kept telling myself. He didn't touch me, didn't say anything, didn't run after me. But deep inside, I knew he was there for a reason. The way he hid in the bushes, and the way he matched my pace through the leaves told me he wasn't out for a morning walk. I sat there for almost an hour, just listening to the normal sounds of my apartment. The fridge humming, cars passing by outside, the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Everything felt normal, but I didn't feel normal anymore. Later that day, when I went to work, I kept thinking about him. What if I hadn't run fast enough? What if he had stepped out sooner, blocking my path? What if he had a knife? Those thoughts kept spinning in my head over and over. I realized that I never wanted to run that trail alone ever again. I realized that early morning isn't as safe as people say. I realized that the world has people in it who hide in bushes at 5 in the morning, waiting for someone to come running by alone. That night, I didn't sleep well. I kept waking up every hour, thinking I heard footsteps outside my apartment door. I kept checking the locks. I kept looking out the peephole, seeing nothing but the dark hallway. But I couldn't stop thinking about how easily he could have followed me home if he wanted to. The next morning, I didn't go for a run. I sat by my window drinking coffee, staring down at the street, watching people walk by, and wondering which one of them might be just like him. Since that day, I haven't run alone in the dark again. I stick to the main roads with streetlights and other runners. But every time I see a man wearing a dark hood, I feel my throat tighten and my chest feels heavy. I keep thinking about that morning, about the bike on the trail, about the footsteps in the bushes, about the thin man watching me as I ran away. I know that if I had stopped running, if I had tripped, if I had paused to tie my shoe or catch my breath, I wouldn't be sitting here writing this down. I would be just another news story about an early morning jogger who never came home. That thought stays with me every single day. When my parents decided to get a divorce, it didn't really shock me. I had spent most of my teenage years listening to them argue about things that seemed small at first, like what brand of tea to buy or how to fold towels. But over time it turned into bigger fights about money, loyalty, and responsibilities. I was 18 at the time, and I thought I was mature enough to handle the changes. Maybe I was too numb to care. All I knew was that we were moving out of our family home into a small apartment. It was a two-bedroom unit on the top floor of an older three-story building on the edge of the city. The hallways smelled faintly of bleach and old carpets. There were stains on the ceiling tiles in the lobby from water leaks, and the paint on the stair railings was chipped and rough to touch. The apartment itself felt cramped from the first moment I walked in. The walls were painted an off-white color, slightly yellow from years of indoor smoke or old cooking oils. There was a lingering stale smell, mixed with scented cleaning sprays the landlord probably used right before showing us the place. My brother got the smaller room since he was only 13 and still wanted his own privacy. My mother and I shared the bigger room. She took the narrow twin bed, pushed up against the wall under the window. I slept on the floor beside her, close enough to hear her breathing at night. The floor was covered with a thin gray carpet, and I laid my folded blanket and a flat pillow directly on it. Some nights, I'd use my backpack to prop up my head. The carpet wasn't soft. It felt rough against my arms and legs whenever I shifted positions in the dark. But I told myself it was temporary, that I would find work soon, save up, and move into a better place or go to university far away. At least, that was the plan echoing around my mind as I lay there each night staring at the lumps on the ceiling where the plaster wasn't even. The bathroom was small, just a sliding door away from the kitchen. The bathtub was old and stained with rings that wouldn't scrub out no matter what cleaning chemical I used. The tiles were chipped along the edges, and the faucet dripped if I didn't tighten it just right. I took showers every evening, mostly to wash off the stickiness from hot summer days and to have a moment to myself where I could hear nothing but water falling onto the tub floor. That first week after we moved in, I was standing under the hot spray with my eyes closed, feeling the steam collect around my shoulders and face, breathing in the faint smell of shampoo, when I heard it. A voice. It was so clear, bouncing around the bathroom tiles, echoing off the tub and walls. It said, in this bright, light tone that almost sounded playful, come on, let's go out and play. Come and get me." I froze, shampoo dripping down into my eyes. For a moment, I thought maybe my brother was messing with me, calling out from the other side of the door. But it didn't sound like him. It sounded like a child, younger than him, maybe 5 or 6 years old. The voice sounded like it was inside the bathroom with me, not outside. I rinsed my hair as fast as I could and turned off the water, my hands shaking as I wrapped myself in the thin towel. The bathroom was empty. The mirror was fogged up completely, and the air felt heavy with steam. I opened the door and stepped out into the hallway, heart pounding, waiting to see if someone was there giggling, but no one was there. My brother's door was closed. My mother was sitting on the edge of her bed folding clothes. She didn't even look up when I walked past dripping water onto the carpet. I tried to brush it off as stress from the move, lack of sleep, and the tension between my parents. But the next day, it happened again. I was scrubbing conditioner into my hair, eyes closed, when the voice came back, louder and more playful. "Come on, let's go out and play. Come and get me." It sounded like the child was bouncing from one end of the bathroom to the other, like a kid jumping from foot to foot, excited and impatient. I rinsed off as fast as I could and stepped out, my breathing fast and shallow. That night, I lay on my mat staring at the ceiling. I could hear my mother's breathing turn into soft snores. My brother's room was silent except for the low buzz of his phone charging on the nightstand. The apartment felt too quiet, almost like the walls were holding their breath, waiting for something. On the third day, when I heard the voice again, I didn't even finish my shower. I turned off the water, still covered in soap, and stepped out, feeling the cold air hit my wet skin, leaving goosebumps all over my arms and legs. I wrapped the towel around myself and sat on the closed toilet seat, staring at the damp floor tiles, trying to calm down. The voice sounded like it belonged to a little boy, one who wanted to play tag or hide and seek. It was the innocence in the tone that scared me the most. It felt wrong to hear it echoing in the small bathroom. That evening, while we were eating instant noodles for dinner sitting on the living room floor, because we didn't have a dining table yet, I told my mother about the voice. I told her exactly what it said and how it sounded. She looked at me with tired eyes, the kind of look people give when they want to care, but are too drained to find the energy. She said nothing at first, just kept eating slowly, blowing on each bite to cool it down. Later that night, she rummaged through her boxes until she found a small bottle of holy water. We're Catholic, and though she wasn't strict with religion, she believed in the basic protections. She walked through the apartment, sprinkling holy water on the door frames and windows, whispering small prayers under her breath. She dipped her fingers in the bottle and touched my forehead before I lay down on my mat that night. I pulled the blanket up to my chin and tried to focus on the faint hum of the fridge in the kitchen or the distant traffic outside the building. I closed my eyes tightly, telling myself I was just imagining things, that the blessing would make it stop. But sometime after midnight, I woke up. At first, I didn't know what woke me. The room was dark, except for a bit of orange glow coming from the streetlights outside. My mother was snoring softly on the twin bed, facing the window with her back to me. My mat felt different under me, heavier. I realized quickly that I wasn't imagining it. There was weight on it, like someone was stepping onto the mat, pressing down on it with both feet. I felt the pressure on my legs first, then on my hip. I froze completely, not even daring to breathe too loud. In my mind, I started listing off everyone who it could be. My mother was asleep, her breathing slow and even. My brother was in his room. The door was closed, and he never came into our room at night. Our dog was locked in his kennel by the front door, snoring in his sleep. I couldn't think of anyone else who could be standing there on my mat. I could feel the shape of the weight shifting, like someone was bending their knees, crouching down to look at me. My heart was beating so hard I thought it might explode out of my chest. I slowly pushed at the space near my feet with my toes, hoping to touch fabric, a leg, anything solid, but my feet only touched air. There was nothing there, yet the pressure remained. It felt like the air got thicker around me, like the room was filled with something I couldn't see. I turned onto my side, facing away from the twin bed, pulling my blanket tighter around me. That's when I felt it. Cold air, colder than anything I had ever felt in that apartment, brushed against my face. It was so cold that my eyes watered immediately. I kept them closed as tight as I could. I didn't want to see anything. I didn't want to know what was there. The cold air felt like someone exhaling right onto my skin. The presence stayed there, crouched down on the balls of its feet in front of my face. I could hear it breathing lightly, in and out, like a small child trying to catch its breath after running. Then I heard a quiet sigh. It was so close to me, I felt the warmth of it mix with the freezing air. And then, in the faintest whisper, it said, "Goodbye." The voice wasn't playful this time. It sounded tired, almost sad, like it knew it wasn't coming back. I lay there, completely still, not daring to move or open my eyes, feeling the cold air fade away, as if it was being sucked out of the room. I don't know how long I stayed like that, listening to the silence settle around me again. Eventually, my body gave up, and I fell asleep, still curled up on my side, clutching the edge of my blanket. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. My back ached from staying in the same position all night. I sat up slowly and looked around the room. My mother was already up, sitting on the bed, tying her hair back. She didn't ask me how I slept. I didn't tell her what happened. There was nothing to say. I felt like the air was lighter that day. The apartment felt normal again, as normal as it could with peeling paint and stained tiles. I took my shower in silence. There was no voice that day, or the day after, or the day after that. In the weeks that followed, I found a job stocking shelves at a grocery store down the road. I spent most of my days carrying boxes and filling shelves with canned beans, flour bags, and cleaning sprays. My feet hurt at the end of every shift, but I was glad to be away from the apartment for as long as I could. At night, I lay on my mat staring at the ceiling lumps, listening to the fridge hum, feeling the warmth from my mother's presence just a few feet away. The air felt empty now, just regular air, with no strange voices echoing off the walls. Sometimes, while walking home from work in the dark, I would think about that night, about the cold air on my face, about that small sigh and the final word it left me with. I still don't know what it was or why it came to me. I never heard its voice again. Maybe it found wherever it needed to go. Maybe it moved on. Or maybe it realized I wasn't the one it was looking for. All I knew was that after that night, my showers became silent again, the apartment felt a little less heavy, and I learned to sleep on my mat without thinking about the rough carpet underneath, or the weight I once felt pressing down on me. Life went on. I never really bought into the idea of ghosts or spirits or anything like that. I was raised to think that when you die, you just die. Lights out. Nothing after. My dad was the same way. My mom didn't really talk about religion, so I never picked up any beliefs from her either. I grew up thinking that people who believed in ghosts just liked to scare themselves for fun, or they needed to believe there was something else after death to feel okay about dying. I didn't judge them for it, but I just never thought it was real. When I was 16, my stepbrother died. He was 19. We weren't super close, but he lived with us. He had this little basement room. It wasn't like a dungeon or anything. My dad had developed the basement years ago, so his room was finished, carpeted, and had decent lighting. He had his bed tucked into one corner, a desk against the far wall, and posters up like any other teenage boy's room. Sometimes I'd go down there to use his old Xbox if he wasn't home. It always smelled a bit like his cologne mixed with the basement smell, cold and earthy. When he died, my dad didn't want to change the room at first. It was left just how it was for almost a year untouched. Eventually, we converted it into a computer room. My dad put a big wooden desk down there, set up the family computer, and it became where we'd go to do homework or browse online. There wasn't a door to the room, just an open entryway at the bottom of the stairs. Right beside it, lined up along the same basement wall, were the washer, dryer, and freezer. When I was 18, my parents went on vacation for a week. They left my older sister, Nicole, in charge. She was 20 at the time and thought she was the queen of the world when Mom and Dad were gone. That night, we'd been out running errands, nothing exciting, just grabbing toilet paper, milk, and some snacks from the grocery store. It was around 8:30 p.m. when we got back home. The sky was already dark. There weren't any streetlights near our driveway, so the porch light cast a small circle of orange onto the front steps, but the yard and driveway were black. I remember walking inside. The house felt empty, just like it should have. Nicole went into the kitchen to put the milk away. I remember how quiet it was. No TV, no music, just the hum of the fridge. I didn't bother staying upstairs. I walked through the kitchen and headed straight down the stairs to the basement to check my MySpace. That was the thing back then. I remember feeling cold when I stepped down there, like I always did, but I was used to it. I sat down at the computer and started typing away. I don't even remember what I was doing, probably updating my status about something dumb or browsing posts on LiveJournal. I felt calm, relaxed, happy to be alone in my own little world. Then suddenly there was this loud bang. It wasn't like a small knock or something falling off a shelf. It was sharp, loud, and metallic. It hit the washer, I think. The sound echoed through the basement, and I jumped in my chair. My heart started racing so fast I could hear it pounding in my ears. I turned around, expecting to see something on the floor, or maybe a shelf knocked over. Instead, I saw this hard plastic pretzel container bouncing on the concrete floor near the washer. It was one of those big clear containers with a red lid, the kind you buy from Costco. The lid was screwed on tight, and the container was empty. For a few seconds, I just stared at it. My brain was trying to work out what just happened. I didn't even have time to move before I heard Nicole's voice yelling down the stairs from the kitchen. She sounded pissed. I thought she was yelling at me for something I did online, or maybe she needed help with the groceries. But then I realized she thought I had thrown the container at her. My stomach twisted a little when I realized I hadn't touched it. The container had been sitting up on the kitchen counter by the entryway, far from where she was standing at the sink. I thought maybe it fell somehow, or the vibration from us walking through the kitchen had knocked it down. But then again, that counter wasn't close to the sink. It was across the room, near the door to the dining room. I remember how uneasy I felt sitting there, thinking about it. The house felt too quiet again. It was like that silence that presses on your ears, making you feel like you're underwater. I could hear the hum of the freezer, the faint tick of the computer's fan, and nothing else. My chest felt tight. I tried to shake it off, thinking maybe Nicole had thrown it down the stairs as a joke. But then I thought about her voice. She sounded genuinely angry, not playful at all. Later that night, after Nicole stormed out to go to her boyfriend's place, I stayed in the house alone. I didn't want to admit I was scared. I tried to play it cool, thinking it was probably just her messing with me. But part of me wasn't convinced. So I decided to test something out. I took the pretzel container and set it right in the middle of the dining room table. I pressed down to make sure it was stable and wouldn't roll off easily. Then I turned off all the lights, checked that the front and back doors were locked, and went upstairs to my room. I lay in bed for a long time, staring up at the ceiling. My room was dark except for the faint yellow glow of the streetlight outside filtering through the blinds. I listened to every creak and pop the house made as it settled in the cool night air. At some point, I fell asleep. When I woke up, the sun was shining through the blinds, casting sharp beams of light across my carpet. The house was silent. I got up, stretched, and walked out to the hallway. The air smelled stale, like a closed-up house after a long night. I walked down the stairs, feeling a small rush of anxiety in my chest. I turned the corner into the dining room and stopped. The container wasn't on the table anymore. It was standing upright on the floor, right in front of the front door. The lid was still on. It hadn't rolled there. It was placed there, standing perfectly straight. The front door was locked, deadbolt still in place. The house was still empty. Nicole hadn't come home. Nobody had been there except me. I just stood there for a long time staring at it. The house felt different in that moment. It felt like someone was standing behind me, breathing lightly, watching me to see how I would react. My heart started racing again. My stomach felt sick, heavy with this cold feeling I can't really explain. I picked up the container slowly, feeling how light it was, how harmless. I set it back on the table and walked to the kitchen. I didn't know what else to do. The sun was shining bright through the windows, lighting up the dust floating in the air. Everything looked normal, but it didn't feel normal. I made coffee, but I couldn't drink it. My hands were shaking too much, and the smell made me feel nauseous. I left the mug on the counter, still full, and sat down at the table, staring at the container. I tried to reason it out in my head. Maybe there was a draft. Maybe the house was slanted just enough to make it move on its own. But that didn't make sense. It wasn't rolling. It was standing up, straight, right by the door like someone had set it there for me to find. I started thinking about all the little things that had happened in the house since my stepbrother died. Things I'd brushed off at the time. Keys going missing for days, then showing up exactly where I left them. The basement lights flicking on by themselves in the middle of the night. The faint smell of his cologne sometimes when nobody was around. I didn't want to believe any of it. I didn't want to think that something unexplainable was happening. I wanted to think it was all in my head, or there was some logical reason behind it all. But that morning, standing there in the silent house with the container at my feet, I couldn't explain it. There was nothing about it that made sense. I picked up the container again and set it in the pantry, tucking it behind a few boxes of cereal. I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to think about it. I went back down to the basement and turned on the computer. I tried to focus on the screen, scrolling through my old MySpace messages, reading people's posts about parties and band concerts and who was dating who. None of it felt real in that moment. I felt like I was sitting in a bubble, cut off from the rest of the world. After about an hour, I shut the computer off and went back upstairs. The house still felt heavy, like the air was pressing down on my shoulders. I walked out the front door, locked it behind me, and just started walking down the street. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to get out of that house. I walked for miles through the quiet neighborhoods, past dark windows and silent yards. The sun was hot on the back of my neck, but I felt cold inside. My mind kept going back to the container, standing upright by the door, like someone had placed it there on purpose. Eventually, I stopped at a gas station. I bought a bottle of water and sat on the curb outside, drinking it slowly, feeling the cold plastic against my hand. Cars drove by, people went in and out, the world moved on like nothing happened. I sat there for over an hour before I finally stood up and started walking home. When I got back, the house felt silent again, but normal silent this time. Nicole was home, sitting on the couch scrolling through her phone. She didn't say anything to me, just nodded, and I went up to my room. The pretzel container stayed in the pantry for weeks. Every time I saw it, I felt my chest tighten. I never told my dad about it. I didn't want to hear him laugh and call me an idiot. I didn't tell my mom either. But every time I went down to the basement after that, I felt like someone was sitting in the far corner, just out of sight, waiting, watching. I never saw anything. I never heard voices or footsteps. Just that heavy feeling in the air, like the whole house was holding its breath. Years later, when I moved out, I thought about that morning sometimes. The way the light looked coming through the windows, the smell of stale air and cold coffee, the container standing by the door. I still don't believe in ghosts. I don't think I ever will. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And every now and then, when I'm sitting alone in my apartment late at night and the walls creak and settle, I remember I've lived in the same house for as long as I can remember. It was a small brick house, nothing special from the outside, But to me it was everything. My childhood, my comfort, and a place where I felt safe even when things around me felt strange or wrong. There were 4 of us, me, my brother, my sister, and my mom. Dad wasn't really around much, so most of the time it was just us 3 kids messing about in the street or the garden when the weather was nice. We had a simple life. School, homework, TV, then bed. But as I got older, things started to happen that I couldn't really explain. And though I don't believe in ghosts or spirits or any of that stuff, I can't say these things didn't scare me. I think the first thing that really shook me happened when I was about 12. It was late summer, warm but with that breeze that tells you autumn isn't far away. I'd gone to the orchard down by the canal with my mate Ryan. His gran lived nearby, and she didn't care if we played there so long as we didn't nick too many apples. The orchard had been there for years. Some of the trees were ancient, twisted trunks with heavy branches. The ground was always littered with fallen apples and wasps buzzing low over the bruised fruit. We'd heard stories about that place, of course. Every kid around there had. The one that stuck with us was about a boy who got caught out in a thunderstorm years ago. He'd apparently tried to shelter under one of the trees. Lightning struck it, and the tree exploded, killing him instantly. I never knew if that was true, but Ryan swore it was. He said his uncle told him he saw the scorch marks on the trunk when he was a kid. Whether it was true or not, we still went there. It didn't stop us from climbing up the trees and dropping apples down into each other's hoodies for fun. That day we were just messing about, chucking rotten apples at the far wall, seeing who could throw further. Suddenly, out of nowhere, small stones started pelting us from behind. At first, I thought it was just other kids trying to wind us up. That happened sometimes. There was a group of older lads who hung out by the canal bridge and threw stuff at people walking past. But when we turned around, no one was there. I picked up a stone and looked around, trying to see if someone was hiding behind a tree trunk or crouching in the long grass. Nothing. Another stone flew past my ear, close enough that I flinched. It wasn't like 1 or 2 stones rolling down a slope either. They were being thrown with force. Ryan shouted for whoever it was to stop, but the stones kept coming. We both dropped the apples we were holding and ran like Billy-O down the grass slope and out of the orchard, not even stopping to look back until we were halfway down the lane. When we finally stopped, chest heaving, Ryan looked at me with wide eyes and said, "What the hell was that?" I didn't answer because I didn't know. Even now, thinking back, I still don't know. It could have been kids messing with us, hidden perfectly behind the trees, but it didn't feel like that. It felt like someone or something didn't want us there. Life carried on, as it does, and eventually we stopped going to that orchard. I think deep down we both felt uneasy about it after that day. School took over, exams started looming, and soon enough, the orchard became a memory, tucked away with the other bits of childhood that slowly faded. When I was about 16, I started noticing something strange at home. Our back door was old, one of those wooden ones with a stiff handle and a latch that rattled when you moved it. I started hearing it rattle every night, at exactly 10:45 p.m. It wasn't like a big bang or someone trying to break in, just a subtle shake, enough that you'd hear it even if you were upstairs in bed, reading or scrolling your phone. At first, I thought it was the wind, but it only rattled at that time. Never earlier, never later. My sister, who had the room closest to the back garden, said she heard it too. My brother did as well. I remember once I decided to see what it was. I stayed up late, sat on my bedroom floor by the window that overlooked the garden, and kept the window cracked open. The night was silent, only the hum of distant traffic and the odd barking dog breaking it. Then, right on time, I heard the rattle. I leaned out and looked down, expecting to see a fox or maybe a stray cat pushing at the door. But there was nothing. The concrete slabs outside were empty. The garden gate was closed. The bushes didn't even move. It was like the door rattled by itself. I kept watching, feeling a cold shiver spread across my shoulders even though it was warm in my room. The rattling stopped after a few seconds. I stayed by the window for another hour, watching, listening. But it didn't happen again that night. The next day I told myself it was probably just the wood contracting with the temperature drop, or something simple like that. Even now, that's what I tell myself. Because if it wasn't that, I don't know what it could have been. When I was about 8, I joined the Cubs. We went on camps in the local woods every summer. I used to love it, sleeping in tents, cooking sausages on sticks, staying up late telling stories around the fire. But one year something happened that I've never quite been able to shake off. We were camping in the woods about 5 miles from town. It wasn't deep forest or anything, just patches of dense trees and open clearings, with an old path running through. One night, after we'd eaten, a couple of us went to fill water bottles from the standpipe by the path. I was standing in the clearing, torch in hand, just sweeping it around out of boredom. The beam moved over the tree trunks and bushes, then stopped. I saw a dark figure standing amongst the trees, not far from the edge of the clearing. At first, I thought it was one of the older scouts trying to scare us. I kept my torch on it, expecting them to move or duck down, but it just stood there. It was the shape of a man, broad shoulders, standing completely still. I felt my mouth go dry. I waved my torch around the ground, thinking maybe the shadows were playing tricks on me. But when I brought the beam back up, it was still there. I shouted out to Ryan, who was filling bottles a few feet away, telling him I could see someone in the trees. He came over and shone his torch too. He saw it. He didn't say anything, just stood beside me staring. We called one of the leaders over. He walked towards us, annoyed, probably thinking we were messing around. When he reached us and asked what was going on, we pointed into the trees. But the figure was gone. The leader shone his big torch all around the area, into every bush and tree trunk, then told us off for trying to scare each other. But we both knew what we saw. Later that night, lying in my sleeping bag, I kept thinking about it. The shape, the way it didn't move even when we shone the light directly on it. I told myself it was probably an older scout in a dark hoodie, standing still to freak us out. But a part of me wasn't sure. I didn't sleep much that night, and in the morning, I stayed close to the leaders, not wanting to stray too far from camp. Years later, when I was in my late teens, my sister got a job at a mail order place that operated out of these old stables on the edge of town. The buildings were proper old, made of stone and wood, with thick beams across the ceilings and tiny windows that let in hardly any light. She worked in the office upstairs, and the owners lived in a house just down the track. One evening, the owner's wife was leaving. The sun had just set, and the place was quiet apart from the creaking wood and the calls of birds settling down in the trees outside. To get out, she had to go down these narrow stairs. As she started descending, she saw a man in dirty overalls coming up the stairs towards her. She didn't think much of it, maybe a maintenance worker or a delivery driver. He didn't look at her or move aside, so she pressed herself against the wall to let him pass. But as she got to the bottom and turned around to see where he'd gone, he was still climbing up the stairs. The problem was, there were no stairs above the floor she'd just come down from. She stood there, staring up at him, but he just kept climbing until he faded into the darkness of the upper beams. Later, the staff found out there used to be more stairs there when it was still an active stable, hundreds of years ago. The top floor had long since been sealed off and turned into storage. My sister told me that story when she got home, and I remember the way her face looked, pale, eyes wide, her hands shaking a little as she took off her coat. I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to believe it, and neither did she. We sat in silence for a while, the TV playing quietly in the background, both of us thinking about that man in the overalls climbing stairs that no longer existed. Thinking back to all these moments now, they still make my chest tighten. I've never seen a ghost or anything like that, and I don't believe I ever will. But life has these moments that don't fit into the boxes we want them to. Strange things happen that we can't always explain, and we're left wondering if it was our eyes playing tricks, our minds seeing what wasn't there, or if it was something else entirely. When I finally moved out in my early 20s, I remember sitting in my empty room on the last night before I handed over the keys. The house felt different that night. It felt small, like the walls were pressing in, but it also felt safe, like it always had. I sat by the window one last time, listening to the street below, thinking about everything that had happened in that house and around it. The orchard, the rattling back door, the figure in the woods, and the man on the stairs. I didn't hear the door rattle that night. It was completely silent. I don't know if that was the house's way of saying goodbye or just a coincidence, but I remember feeling strangely sad about it. I shut the window, picked up my bags, and left the house behind, stepping out into the cool night air and closing the chapter on all those strange moments that made up my childhood. Even now, years later, when I walk past the old orchard on my way to work or see a tent pitched in the woods, those memories come back to me clear as day. I don't think they'll ever leave me, and maybe that's okay, because they remind me that life isn't always what we think it is. Sometimes